Chapter 519. Dongxuan's cries were deafening. Fu Baogua and Yunyang bowed respectfully at Han Sanha's body that was still standing upright and retreated slowly. This continent's god of war had spent his entire life fighting the world and had caused immense pain to Yutang's people. However, they had different standpoints and had practiced war. They served their own masters. There was no right or wrong. Whether it was Yunyang or Fu Baogua, they had to acknowledge this man's lifetime of achievements with a sense of melancholy. No matter what, this was a qualified soldier. A qualified marshal. Rest in peace. Yunyang said softly, "If there's a next life, we shall fight again." Fu Baogua heaved a long sigh. Her gaze towards Yunyang was filled with gentleness. No matter what, there were not many people who could understand a pure military man like Han Sanha. Yunyang's words were not only an acknowledgement of Han Sanha, but also the greatest understanding of the continent's militants. If there was a next life, they would fight again. Fu Baogua. Zhang Gu hollered, jumping up like a madman, his eyes bloodshot. It's you who forced my teacher to his death. Do you want to leave just like that?" Fu Baogua stood still and turned to speak coldly. "You and I both know the reason for Marshal Han's death and we are well aware of it. Zhang Gu, I know you're upset, but if you intend to go against Marshal Han's dying wish and insist on fighting, Fu Baogua, and 200,000 Yutang men will fight with you. There's no need to use such a lame excuse." Zhang Gu trembled when he heard him, glaring at Fu Baogua as if he wanted to devour him. After a long time, his gaze returned to Han Sanha. After a long time, Zhang Gu roared, "Yes, Marshal. Retreat. Dongxuan's army, retreat." As soon as he finished, Zhang Gu spat a mouthful of blood. His muscular body fell to the ground, facing the sky. After that, Dongxuan's army only stayed for half a day before they began to retreat slowly. When they retreated, the entire army was already dressed in plain mourning, white banners covering the sky. All the soldiers were silently shedding tears as they quietly walked back. The gloomy atmosphere along the way was startling to see. No one could doubt what kind of astonishing emotions were brewing in the chest cavity of this kind of troop, but they were forcefully suppressing them to not erupt. Before they left, all the Dongxian soldiers turned to look in Yutang's direction. Their wolf-like gazes made one's heart sink. Despite the high morale of Yutang's soldiers, they were inexplicably shocked. No matter what, Dongxuan's troops had retreated. The battle of the century between Yutang and Dongxian had finally come to an end. Yutang had won after all. "We won. We won." All of Yutang's soldiers cheered. For a moment, the ecstatic cheers shook the clouds. Yunyang and Fu Baogua stood side by side on their horses, watching Dongxuan's army that was slowly leaving and getting further away. There was no trace of joy on their faces. Even when they heard the deafening cheers of their own soldiers, they remained silent. It wasn't that the two of them didn't feel relaxed, but at the same time, they also felt an indescribable melancholy. The god of war had fallen just like that. He had committed suicide in front of two armies. He had used his life in exchange for the safe return of 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers and the continuation of the Han family's glory. He had even used his death to preserve a large amount of energy for Dongxian and a buffer time that was sufficient for them to recuperate. Furthermore, the ruler had obtained the space to expand his regime without any hindrance. Just like what Fu Baogua had said, Han Sanha had not lost to Yutang nor to the Nine Supremes. He had only lost to Dongxuan's imperial court. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that his way home was on the battlefield, and he wouldn't be trampled by those political clowns. "I didn't expect the god of war to end like this." Fu Baogua's mood was downcast. As an enemy, Han Sanha was undoubtedly the person he hated the most. This was because the damage this person had done to Yutang and to the continent's situation had almost reached a height that was unparalleled throughout the ages. However, from a military standpoint, Han Sanha was also the person Fu Baogua admired the most. Throughout the 5,000 years of Tianquan's militarism, Han Sanha's achievements in military affairs could only be described with 8 words: unprecedented and unparalleled. An absolute god of war. Unshakable and unparalleled, unprecedented and unparalleled. Yin Yang sighed faintly and said, "Actually, Marshal Fu might not have noticed that there was a deeper meaning behind Han Sanha's expedition this time. Perhaps he never planned to return from the beginning. Whether he won or lost this war, whether he lived or died, Han Sanha had already decided not to return to Dongxian." Fu Baogua thought about Yun Yang's sudden statement for a long time and said, "I understand half of it. As for the other half, please enlighten me, young Master Yun." Yin Yang said, "Perhaps Han Sanha didn't think that he would die when he first deployed his troops. On one hand, he wanted to nurture his domestic forces and ensure that there would be no gaps in Dongxuan's military higher-ups. On the other hand, he wanted to conquer half of Yutong as his backyard and his biggest political leverage. The purpose of this can be said to be obvious. As long as he succeeds, even if he survives, as long as he has half of Yutong in his hands, Han Sanha will have no worries even if he has to face the whole of Dongxian. On the other hand, if he fails, there's no way out. There's really no need for him to continue living. It's just a matter of dying earlier or later." Yin Yang analyzed calmly. "According to our intelligence, Han Sanha's situation in the nation of Dongxian isn't looking good. He's basically surrounded by enemies on all sides. Furthermore, he's used this war and the pressure of the nation's righteousness to send all the private armed forces of Dongxuan's aristocratic families into the battlefield. Han Sanha's ruthlessness doesn't stop there. His true cruelty lies in the fact that he's conscripted all these armed forces and sent them all to the Fortress of Resilience. There's a total of 700,000 of them. During this period of time, Dongxian has attacked the Fortress of Resilience with all its might, regardless of the cost and casualties. Actually, Marshal Fu, what you're facing are only the private troops commanded by Han Sanha, not Han Sanha's elite troops. There's a decisive difference between the two." Yin Yang said faintly. "Han Sanha has actually cooperated with you, Marshal Fu. It's all because of your intentional and unintentional cooperation that Dongxuan's malignant armed forces are sent to their graves. Almost 1 million private troops have been killed just like that. The nation of Dongxian is basically in peace now. Even if there's still some left, it won't affect the overall situation. As long as Dongxuan's emperor isn't a muddle-headed bastard. Therefore, Han Sanha's greatest contribution, the one that's least acknowledged, is here." Fu Baogua was hit with a sudden realization. "I see." After a while, he murmured, No wonder. When I evaluated the combat power of both sides, the conclusion I came up with was that I could only hold on for a while before Han Sanha broke through. However, the truth is far more optimistic than my estimation. I've held on for more than twice the amount of time. If not for this extra buffer time, Yutong's chances of losing this war would have increased by at least 50%. I've thought of many things before this. I've thought about the help of Marquis Yun, I've thought about the efforts of other reinforcements, but the only thing I didn't think about was Dongxuan's internal support. Life is like a game of chess indeed, the universe is unpredictable. Therefore, all of Dongxuan's nobles, including the royals, hate Han Sanha to the core. If this war is lost, only death awaits Han Sanha when he returns. He's already in an awkward situation where he can't advance or retreat. No matter if he advances or retreats, it's a path to hell. Furthermore, if Han Sanha returns to Dongxian alive, Dongxuan's military will be suppressed to the point where they can't even lift their heads due to this defeat. For a long time to come, Dongxuan's military will be at an absolute disadvantage in the imperial court. Militants are the worst at dealing with situations where they're in the wrong. They'll only be beaten up passively without any room to turn things around. If that happens, Dongxian will lose its god of war and its military power. How could it be fortunate that its military won't be able to recover? Even if the nobles see this, they won't give up on their own benefits. They've only ever had benefits in their eyes, there's no such thing as morality. If that happens, Dongxian will truly be finished. Yin Yang said in admiration, but the situation now is completely different. Han San is dead. The source of Dongshuan's defeat and conflict has used his death to atone for his sins. He died for the lives of 300,000 soldiers and Dongshuan's national destiny. He used his death to turn the tables on this terrible situation. Han San's death has turned the nation's military into a mourning army. Mourning soldiers have always been extremely frenzied and difficult to defeat. There's a saying in the art of war that a mourning army is bound to win. It's never just a saying because such a troop dares to charge forward and risk their lives no matter what enemy they're facing. I dare say that even with the 9 Supremes' help, they might not be able to shake the 300,000 mourning soldiers. The 9 Supremes' greatest influence on the battlefield comes from their control of the heaven and earth's power. Ordinary people are extremely fearful of them, losing their will to fight the moment they encounter them. They only have the thought of running for their lives, but these 300,000 mourning soldiers have already surpassed an ordinary person's concept of life and death. They'll still die, but they're truly unafraid of death. Against such a troop, the 9 Supremes can hardly unleash their full potential. It's truly frightening and unshakable. Facing such mourning soldiers, no matter how strong the opposition in Dongxian is, as long as anyone or any force dares to step out and speak ill of Han Sanha or impose any sort of punishment on the Han family, they'll be torn to shreds by Dongshuan's military regardless of the cost. Chapter 520. Yun Yang looked at Fu Baogua. All in all, Marshal Fu, you're just a pure soldier, while Han Sanha, other than being the most outstanding soldier, was also an extremely incisive politician. He could even make use of his own life and death so thoroughly. It's equally frightening and shocking. Fu Baogua chuckled dryly. How can I be as thorough as young Master Yun? The only thought that crossed my mind just now was that as a fellow soldier, and as such a respectable military legend, I must help you. Even if I have to bear the blame, I must do it. He turned to stare into Yun Yang's eyes and said, I will personally report this matter to His Majesty. I will not shirk my responsibility. Yun Yang smiled and said, Marshal Fu, are you afraid that I'll snitch on you to His Majesty? Han Sanha's calling me a descendant of nobility just now has such an effect. It has subtly driven a wedge between Marshal Fu and me. Marshal Fu has never seen eye to eye with me. Now that I have the identity of a royal relative, my stance is even more subtle. Am I right? Fu Baogua felt awkward and said, I didn't mean that, I really didn't mean that. Young Master Yun, you're thinking too much. Yun Yang laughed heartily and lowered his voice to say, Marshal Fu, regarding this matter, I think it's best to end it here. In this world, probably only you, I, and heaven and earth know about this subtlety. Dongshuan's military hates you to the core. No matter what, you're the one who forced Han Sanha to his death on the surface. So, we don't have to create additional trouble for ourselves and trouble ourselves for nothing. Suddenly, Fu Baogua studied Yun Yang from head to toe seriously, as if he was getting to know Yun Yang all over again. Yun Yang wore an honest smile on his face. Marshal Fu, it's better not to leak some gossip and information if you can. You have to know that even the most enlightened monarch will be suspicious. No matter how fair and open the imperial court is, it's inevitable that there will be conflicts. Especially when it involves great benefits, there will be situations where one has no choice but to do it despite knowing that it shouldn't be done. Fu Baogua sighed softly. Yes, Yun Yang continued, as for me, I'm only a marquis's young master. Even if I have the royal bloodline, it's impossible for me to be acknowledged by the royal family in this lifetime. Naturally, it's impossible for me to participate in the division of that big cake. Actually, with my cultivation base level, ordinary worldly benefits are nothing to me. Isn't it too arrogant of me to say this? Hee hee. Fu Baogua could not help grinning as he said, of course, it's arrogant, but it's more practical. He pondered for a moment and said, if that's the case, then I'll keep this matter to myself. No one will believe me even if I tell them. Yun Yang understood and said, even so, I'll keep it to myself. By the way, when Marshal Fu returns to the capital to report on his work, you must treat me to a drink. Fu Baogua laughed heartily. No problem. I'll get someone to dig a huge pond and fill it with fine wine. Then, I'll prepare plenty of meat and let you stay there. I've long heard of young Master Yun's past reputation. I'm not afraid of your magnanimity. Yin Yang guffawed. The legendary debauchery? Then it's a deal. I won't go back on my word. Then, both of them turned and rode their horses back. The war has come to an end. Looking at the situation, I believe that Dongxian won't have any major military movements for at least 3 years. What plans do you have after this, Marshal Fu? Asked Yin Yang. I've promised Lord Supreme Cloud that I'll guard the Fortress of Resilience with my life. Fu Baogua said respectfully, although the original Fortress of Resilience has been destroyed, I plan to mobilize more manpower and strive to build a new fort that's a few times stronger than the previous one within these 2 years. There won't be any disturbances on the eastern border in the short term, so success is assured. The destruction of the Fortress of Resilience this time can be said to be complete. It's destroyed from its foundation, so it's convenient for me to start anew and rebuild it. Speaking of this, Fu Baogua looked excited. Even if war really breaks out 2 to 3 years later, the new Fortress of Resilience will definitely let Dongxian know that this is a tough bone that they can't even chew through. The world's strongest fort is still right in front of them. Yin Yang said quietly, wrong. Fu Baogua was stunned. Wrong? Yin Yang said, Marshal Fu's thinking is too conservative. The existence of the Fortress of Resilience in the past was to defend against Dongxian. This is understandable. It's because Dongxian has the world's top military force and the world's top marshal. Facing such a strong combination, it's only right to prioritize defense. However, from today onwards, Dongxian will have none of that. Especially after losing Han Sanhe's suppression, the civil and military infighting in Dongxuan's imperial court will be unprecedentedly intense. Yin Yang said calmly, therefore, your rebuilding of the Fortress of Resilience with the intention of guarding the territory has already done more harm than good. The effect is extremely limited. I hope that Marshal Fu can turn the new Fortress of Resilience into a fortress that focuses on offense. From now on, Yutang will no longer be a country that can be bullied or invaded. The basic direction of our strategy will change, from defense to offense. Yin Yang turned to look at Fu Baogua and said with a smile, perhaps, the great undertaking of invading other countries, expanding our territory, and unifying the world will begin in 2 to 3 years. Marshal Fu, perhaps such a great undertaking will come from your hands. Yin Yang beamed brightly. Completed. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes shone. Suddenly, he slapped his thigh and said, that's right, why didn't I think of it? Thanks to young master's reminder, Dongxuan's military force has shrunk greatly without Han Sanhe. What's there to be afraid of? Wait, I have to think about this again. How should the new Fortress of Resilience be built? I need to gather some talents who know how to build a fortress and brainstorm. Oh, this is absolutely great news. As he spoke and thought, he was exhilarated, wishing that he could start working on it right now. Yin Yang looked at Fu Baogua, who was grinning like a fool as he thought about the great achievements of expanding the territory. Yin Yang could not help but smile. Fu Baogua did not look like the top-notch marshal that Han Sanhe had described him to be. He looked like a silly boy. Fu Baogua, who was being stared at by Yin Yang, only snapped out of his daze after he had been grinning like a fool for a long time. Feeling embarrassed, he asked with a straight face, why are you here? Yin Yang was stunned. Why am I here? That's right. Why am I here? Fu Baogua retorted angrily, shouldn't you be escorting old Marshal back to the capital now? Why are you on the battlefield? Yin Yang, how should you be punished for leaving your post without permission? Yin Yang was shocked by the accusation. Marshal Fu, your teacher isn't actually old Grand Commandant Fang, is he? Your teacher should be old Marshal Qiu Jianhan. This kind of hooligan method of burning the bridge after crossing the river and putting the blame on someone else is simply at the pinnacle of perfection. You can do whatever you want as you please. Bah, It should be said as you like. Just open your mouth. Do you dare to be any more shameless? Fu Baoguo was relentless. I'm talking about military duty with you now. Your current responsibility and the position you're supposed to be in aren't here. Why are you making a false accusation? Tell me, where's old Marshal Chiu? He wouldn't be nearby, would he? Yin Yang was helpless. Of course not. He should be 3,000 miles away now. You bastard. Fu Baoguo scolded him unceremoniously. Still spouting nonsense here? Aren't you going to chase after him to protect him? Do you still want to earn battle merits? Are you one of my soldiers? Yin Yang was fuming, wishing that he could reveal his identity as Supreme Cloud and beat this fellow up. He could not help but curse inwardly. I've helped you deal with a 1,000,000-strong army, helped you win this battle, and even given you so many good ideas and painted such a beautiful future. I didn't expect you to be born in the year of the dog, biting me as soon as you turn around. Not only is he born in the year of the King dog, he's a typical mad dog. Can't you be more of a hooligan? Yin Yang had obviously overlooked an important point. Although Qiu Jianhan was the head of the capital city's top 3 rogues and was the most reputable, the more a dog bit, the less it barked. For example, old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian, who was also one of the top 3 rogues, and his successor, Fu Baoguo. In front of Supreme Cloud, Fu Baoguo could only feel inferior and allow the latter to say whatever he wanted. However, the person in question was Yin Yang, and now that the conflict had calmed down, when else would he be waiting for Yin Yang? So what if he was handsome? I'll rush over right away. Yin Yang was full of complaints as he said angrily, Goodbye, sir. No, it's best if we don't meet again. Hold on, I've already promised to make you a place of debauchery. How can we not meet again? Oh, this horse of yours is not bad. Why don't you leave it with me? Fu Baoguo's eyes shone. Where's your shame? Can you be any more shameless than that? Yin Yang's face was dark as he cursed unabashedly with his red teeth. Then, he clamped his legs on the horse's abdomen. Reddy looked at Fu Baoguo in disdain and snorting all over Fu Baoguo's face before it left like a gust of wind. Ck me. Why is this beast so fierce? Fu Baoguo wiped his face hastily. Then, he sighed. So many good brothers, gone just like that. After chasing Yin Yang away, Fu Baoguo stood alone on the battlefield. Suddenly, sorrow welled up in his heart as tears gushed out like a fountain. Prostrating himself on the horse, he covered his face with both hands and wept in a repressed manner. There was really no image left to speak of. My brothers, when there was no one around, Fu Baoguo was shaking like a child as he cried. Who said that a man does not shed tears easily? It was only because he had yet to be heartbroken. On the battlefield, the setting sun shone through the thick layers of clouds. A man and a horse drew long shadows on the pure white snowy ground that was dyed red by fresh blood. When he was sure that there were no outsiders, the marshal's suppressed sobs and indescribable sorrow finally erupted. Chapter 521. The sky gradually darkened. The battlefield was then engulfed in the boundless night. High up in the sky, a pair of doubtful eyes were hidden in the clouds, looking down at the scene below, but it was filled with an inexplicable feeling. Supreme Cloud, who is he? Listening to this, it seems like Han Sanhe has a suspect. Could it be that there are clues related to this in Dongxian? This Yin Yang, he's obviously not Supreme Cloud. He's too young. Especially when he was under surveillance the entire time. From the moment he entered the battlefield, he was ordered around by the marshals and generals. There's nothing suspicious about him at all. Most importantly, when he entered the battlefield, the 9 Supremes attacked at the same time. Yin Yang can't be Supreme Cloud then. Then, who is Supreme Cloud? It's a pity that Han Sanhe died too soon. A clue related to the 9 Supremes was cut off just as soon as it appeared. What fate, the person in the clouds was mumbling to himself. Suddenly, 8 dazzling rays of light fell from the sky like stars, like meteorites falling to the ground. In just an instant, the 8 rays of light pierced through the clouds and landed on the ground almost at the same time. The entire land suddenly fell into a peculiar state of undulating up and down. It was as if many huge earth dragons were rolling and moving under the ground. The 8 colors of red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple, and black constantly flickered on the ground. After a while, they disappeared abruptly. The power of the 9 Supremes. The person in the sky suddenly opened his eyes wide, his eyes filled with astonishment and astonishment. 8 of the 9 Supremes are really dead. This is... Thinking about it, the frustration in the man's heart rose to its peak, almost crushing his own head into smithereens. I see. So this is the truth. It was the spiritual restraining formation that prevented the 9 Supremes from unleashing their powers, but the powers of the manifestations didn't dissipate. Instead, they were sealed in Tianshan Cliff, and the so-called reappearance of the 9 Supremes this time is actually caused by the release of those powers. No wonder the powers are like trees without roots, unable to persist for long despite being powerful. This is the truth. As for the strange light now, should it be the final bloom of the 9 Supremes' power, or what? Why would 8 different types of lights suddenly descend upon this land? This piece of land, there's clearly no longer any signs of life within 1,000 miles. What the hell is going on? Is it just fate, or is there something else? What are your plans? Yin Yang found the 12 children in the Steel Cavalry's camp. But now, there were only 8 left. The faces of the 8 of them were filled with sorrow. However, his expression was filled with determination. If you want to go home, I can make the decision to let you leave. Yin Yang said. If the 8 slightly immature faces hesitated for a moment. We want to take a leave of absence. Send our brothers' bodies back first, then come back to the Fortress of Resilience. Why? Yin Yang frowned. 4 men have been lost in one battle. Aren't you all afraid? Don't you care? He was in a dilemma. These little fellows were so determined. How was he going to explain this to their families? How could it be so fun to join the army to fight a war? The leader of the children was called Li Erden. After joining the army, he had given himself a name, Li Zhan. He hesitated for a moment before saying, Teacher, we know that it doesn't bode well if we stay here, but we're even more unwilling to go back just like this. Firstly, we still have to avenge our 4 brothers. Secondly, we like this atmosphere, we like the battlefield, we like the military camp. Thirdly, he stuttered and snuck a peek at Yun Yang's expression, saying, staying here, although it's cruel, although we have to face life and death at all times, come out, whether it's cruel or tragic, we've seen the outside world after all. Yun Yang understood it all at once. It was true. Coming out of a small, isolated village, it was fine if they could not see the vast world, spending the rest of their lives peacefully in a small valley. However, once these hot-blooded youths had seen the outside world, how could they be willing to return to the isolated village and spend the rest of their lives in silence? Yin Yang was silent for a moment before he said, If you all want a place to live, you can follow me back to the capital. I'll be watching over you there. It's much better than staying here. The 8 children were silent for a moment. Yin Yang could feel the resistance in the silence. It was a resistance of pride. We want to work our way out with our own strength. Li Zhan said softly. Ambitious. Yin Yang said approvingly. The 8 youths blushed together. Yin Yang took out a mystical qi cultivation manual that he had prepared earlier and explained it in detail. He then watched as the 8 children practiced. No matter where you all stay. Yin Yang said in a low voice, never forget where your roots are. Do you understand? Yes. The 8 youths' eyes shone brightly. No matter where you are, no matter what achievements you have in the future, never forget the comrades and brothers who have fought alongside you, never forget the comrades and brothers who have sacrificed themselves by your side. Do you understand? Don't ever forget their families. Never forget, as a man, the responsibility towards his friends, parents, family, country, and the relatives of his comrades who have sacrificed themselves. Yin Yang said in a low voice. His gaze was hollow. Wang Dinghua watched quietly from the side. When Yin Yang said all this, he could clearly feel the sincerity and sense of responsibility that was almost overflowing from him. The weight of each word was as heavy as a mountain. He could not help but look solemn as well. We will remember teacher's teachings. The 8 youths knelt on the ground at the same time and kowtowed. Wang Dinghua. Yin Yang turned and said, "Take good care of them, but they don't need special care." Do you understand? It was a contradictory sentence. However, Wang Dinghua understood once he heard it. He said seriously, "Don't worry, young Master Yun. Old Wang understands." Yin Yang nodded and took out a few banknotes from his pocket. "Send them back home." The youths were about to decline when Yin Yang glared at them. "The brothers who have sacrificed themselves are not going to eat at home?" He shoved them over forcefully. The 8 youths' voices were choked. Those were 500,000 taels worth of banknotes. Even Wang Dinghua, who was watching from the side, was envious. However, Wang Dinghua had made up his mind. No matter what, he had to send these children back. This money belonged only to the small village. No one could touch it. Yin Yang left. He felt a little relieved but also a little disappointed. Working hard by themselves, starting from scratch. The dreams of the youths were always so naive, filled with passion. Yin Yang did not object to it. He would let them work on their own. Perhaps one day, they would become the new legend of starting from scratch. Who could say for sure? However, Yin Yang did not wish for them to realize the importance of relationships, connections, society, human relations. One day and extinguish their passion to work hard before going to the capital city to look for him. Yin Yang did not wish to see that. No matter what, the path of life was always one's own choice. At a certain stage, at a certain fork in the road, the left and right sides would lead to heaven and hell respectively. However, the entrance would be the same. Some would choose heaven, but some would go to hell if they made the wrong choice. In spite of this, there was still the possibility of falling to hell and heaven. There was also a path to heaven and hell. Bless you all. Never change your original intentions in this life. Never forget your original intentions. This blessing was etched in Yin Yang's heart. The 8 youths watched their teacher gallop away into the night, their eyes filled with respect and gratitude. The purple robe would forever remain in the depths of their hearts. "Teacher, you must take care." The 8 youths knelt down silently. Facing the faraway land where the figure had disappeared, they kowtowed silently. "Rise, children." Wang Dinghua sighed inwardly. "You will see your teacher again in the future." Yin Yang, who was already far away and nearing the boundary of Tianshan Cliff, galloped across the snowy plains like a red shadow. However, just as he passed by Tianshan Cliff's boundary, he suddenly heard a loud boom. Yin Yang looked up in shock. The 9 Supremes' temples that stood tall on Tianshan Cliff suddenly collapsed without any warning, turning into fine rubble that littered the ground in an instant. "No!" Yin Yang cried out instinctively. Then, he was dumbstruck, his eyes wide as he screamed, "Why?" It was at this moment that an inexplicable force suddenly surged out from the ground. In less than a tenth of a blink of an eye, it quietly melted into Yin Yang's body, meridians, and dantian. The entire process was simply faster than a bolt of lightning, and it only took the blink of an eye for it to come to an end. It was like a clay ox entering the sea, and there was no further movement. Yin Yang jolted abruptly. It was a familiar force that had fused with him. It was a feeling that only existed when his brothers were together. Brothers. Yin Yang felt an insuppressible wave of sorrow, but he understood what had happened instantly. He had used his identity as Supreme Cloud to trigger the manifestation power of the 9 Supremes that his brothers had left behind. His brother's dying wish, or rather, everyone's hope of merging the 9 Supremes into one, had all been poured into him. After he had triggered this force, he had also triggered his brother's dying wills that had been sealed together. Previously, when the Nine Supremes' power had struck Dongxuan's army, it had only lasted for a short period of time. It was not that the Nine Supremes' power had stopped there, but the remnant wills of the Nine Supremes had retained most of their power and followed him here. In other words, although Yun Yang was still unable to use any of the Nine Supremes' cultivation methods or abilities, he was now truly one with the Nine Supremes. In the most thorough and extreme way, they had merged into one. Yun Yang, who was well aware of this, did not feel the slightest bit of joy. He lay on the horse's back, trembling as tears streamed down his cheeks. "Brothers, will I never be able to see you all again?" The merging of the Nine Supremes into one was the last wish of the deceased Nine Supremes, but it was also the situation that Yun Yang was most unwilling to see. This was because when the Nine Supremes' powers merged into one, it also meant that the original Nine Supremes' traces would be completely erased from this world from this moment onwards. The sky suddenly brightened in a way that it had never been before. On this unusually cold night, a curtain of light that was as bright as day appeared. The gloomy clouds that filled the sky dissipated without a trace in the blink of an eye, as if they had been hit by a hurricane that could destroy the world. The galaxy was bright, the moon was high in the sky. Yin Yang lifted his head to look at the starry sky. Looking at the countless twinkling stars in the sky, it was as if he could see Supreme Earth and the others' faces that he had not seen for a long time. They were smiling and blinking at him in the sky, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Yin Yang could not help the sorrow that welled up in his heart. In the sea of clouds, a man who was covered in chains leaned against a tree, looking at the sky and smiling faintly. "Not bad, not bad. This day has finally arrived. When the Nine Supremes return, the earth will split and the sky will be overturned, the martial world will be dominated by the Supremes. Mr. Nian, your good days are coming. As for me, Heaven's Inquisition. I'm finally going to be free. I've been trapped here all these years. I wonder what the outside world is like." Chapter 522. No matter how grief-stricken Yun Yang was, he still caught up to the retreating troops who were escorting Qiu Jianhan at dawn. Marquis Yun and Bai Yishue stood on the left and right, opening the way as they kept an eye on their surroundings with their powerful deific senses. The four noble young masters and the elites of the four families were in the middle, surrounding and protecting the old marshal. Therefore, their journey was extremely slow. Although they were a good distance ahead, Yun Yang still managed to catch up to them easily. "How is old marshal now?" Yun Yang asked in a gentle tone. Yun Yang was very confident in his precious blood. He believed that the old marshal's condition could only be better than before, not worse. He was merely asking casually. "How's the war?" Shangguan Lingxiu asked back impatiently. The war, hearing that Yun Yang had rushed over, everyone gathered around to ask what was going on. "The war is over, we've won." Yun Yang said, "Han Sanhe is dead and Dong Xian has begun to retreat." Ah, it was such a short and straightforward statement, but it left everyone dumbstruck. No matter how straightforward Yun Yang had said it, the simple war was over, they had won, the enemy's marshal was dead, and the enemy had retreated. It was extremely plain and unpretentious. However, to the crowd, this was great news that they did not even dare to think about. They could not help but be dazed for a moment. Their minds were blank, so silent that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Then, after the extreme silence came an extreme hubbub, the deafening cheers were deafening. There were also endless questions mixed in. Yin Yang knew how the crowd was feeling, so he explained everything patiently. After all, this was an irreplaceable piece of good news to Yutong's people. All along, Yutong's biggest enemy and biggest threat was Dongxian. With the continent's top general, Han Sanhe, and the Dongxian army, which was the most elite in the entire Tianxian continent, working together, they were an extreme threat. Now, Han Sanhe was dead. The continent's top general, Tianxuan's god of war, was dead. Simply put, the threat that Dongxian could pose was reduced by at least 80%. Hearing this great news, how could everyone not cheer and jump for joy? In spite of this, it was hard for them to imagine. They were clearly in a precarious situation in the war, otherwise, why would Fu Baogua arrange for them to evacuate? Nominally, he had asked them to escort the old marshal back safely, but who did not know that the war was in a disadvantageous position and could no longer go on? How could they suddenly win and even kill the enemy's marshal? It sounded so unreal. If this had not come from Yun Yang's mouth, the crowd would have believed that Yun Yang would not joke about it. It was unbelievable and unimaginable. Actually, this is what happened. The 9 Supremes Lords suddenly showed up and the might of the 9 Supremes reappeared in the world. Dong Xian was intimidated by the might of the 9 Supremes Lords, so how could they not be defeated? When Yun Yang uttered the words 9 Supremes, another round of loud cheers erupted from the crowd. Shangguan Lingxiu's bright eyes stared at Yun Yang even more intently, a hint of a smile flashing across her face. That was a top secret that only she knew. It was enough for her to be aware of it. In the end, Dongshuan's defeat was inevitable. To preserve the spark of Dongshuan's military, Han Sanhe willingly committed suicide to end this war. Dong Xian then retreated. We've won this war, Yutang has won. When Yin Yang finished his narration, he saw that the crowd was filled with satisfaction and pride. Thank God. Yutang's crisis has finally been resolved. It was Marquis Yun who said this. Marquis Yun's face was filled with emotion and relief. Yin Yang realized that his cheapskate father's sideburns had already turned white without him noticing. No matter how outstanding his looks were, how heroic he looked, it could not hide the harsh pressure that he had been through. All these years, Yutang had been plagued by internal and external threats. His Majesty was not the only one in the royal family who was doing his best to deal with the situation. Marquis Yun, who was not in the imperial court, was also busy and exhausted. It could even be said that Yun Xiaoyao was more like a firefighter. If there was trouble in the east, he would go there. If there was trouble in the west, he would go to the west. The so-called Marquis of Heavenly Clouds was not involved in the imperial court, it was a smokescreen that did not live up to its name. Even when the world was at peace, he could not stay at home leisurely. He had to pay attention to the movements at the border at all times. Who knew what would happen there? He had to work on improving his capability. Only with this as a prerequisite could he have the capital to make friends with the martial world sects, get to know many martial world experts, and even guard against ace cultivators from opposing countries. All in all, other than the political affairs of the imperial court, he had to worry about everything else. Whatever happened, he had to take care of it. Heaven realm cultivators were humans too, they would get tired as well. If Han Sanhe was burdened by the reputation of being the continent's top general, Tianxuan's god of war, and did not have the chance to reach the pinnacle of his cultivation journey, Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, was similarly troubled by external affairs. If he had cultivated wholeheartedly and not interfered with external affairs, his capability would not be as it was now. Fortunately, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief now. Now that I've returned to the capital, I'll have to rest for a while. It doesn't matter if I don't go out for a few years. Marquis Yun smiled tiredly, but there was satisfaction and longing in his smile. I can roam the world, but it's not as comfortable as resting at home. That is true peace, true stability. All these years, I'm really tired. Yin Yang thought of something and said, now that the war has collapsed, it's a good time for you to go back and have a good rest. I think there must be a lot of things in the capital that require you to manage the situation. Marquis Yun chuckled dryly. You still won't let me go. Are you going to arrange a new task for me? Yin Yang coughed and said, how would I dare? But think about it, His Majesty will be very upset if he sees you idling. Marquis Yun rolled his eyes and said, how would he dare? His words were spoken in a domineering manner. Throughout the entire empire of Yutang, only Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, dared to speak in such a manner, in such a blatant manner. Whether it was Yun Yang, old Marshal Qiu, Marshal Ling Daoyin, or old Grand Commandant Feng, none of them would dare. Right, what have you done to old Marshal Chiu? Why hasn't he woken up yet? Marquis Yun suddenly asked Yun Yang, indirectly answering Yun Yang's initial question. Old Marshal's breathing is steady and his vitality is abundant. His physical condition has improved greatly and his pulse is smooth as well. He's in a state of deep sleep all this while. For days, there's no sign of him waking up. Marquis Yun did not wait for Yun Yang to reply and continued, I've observed and monitored him repeatedly. The reason why old Marshal hasn't woken up is probably due to the loss of his vitality and the excessive depletion of his soul. Such a loss requires a long period of recuperation. However, this is only my personal opinion. As for the actual situation, you, as the one who directly treated him, will have to make the judgment. Regardless, old Marshal's life is definitely preserved. Yun Yang nodded upon hearing his words. Previously, Yun Yang had used his precious blood to snatch away the life of the old Marshal by force. It had been a close shave, a fight against fate. However, as Marquis Yun had predicted, the old Marshal's vitality and soul had been severely damaged. Even though his current physical condition was as healthy as an ordinary person, he still needed a long period of recuperation. His current state of deep sleep was the best. It was only a matter of time before the old Marshal would wake up again. Yun Yang was quite satisfied with his current state and had no further countermeasures. Without Emmy, his precious blood was already Yun Yang's biggest trump card. This was the most he could do. Your judgment is correct. Old Marshal only needs to recuperate now. The war is over, let us depart immediately and return to Tiantang. Not only the old Marshal, everyone else needs to rest as well, said Yun Yang. Very well. Everyone was in a jubilant mood at this moment. The 800-mile express news of the victory was also on the way back to the place where it was reported at the first possible moment. Among the group, only Yun Yang and Marquis Yun had a slight frown on their faces, as if they were troubled. They were not excited by the news of victory. The group of people who were escorting the old Marshal back was made up of the Shengguan family of generals, the four noble families, the residents of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, and old Marshal Chiu's personal guards. These people had high cultivation bases and abilities, but they were not good at foresight and planning ahead. Reminded by Yun Yang's words just now, Marquis Yun's heart that was filled with elation turned into an inexplicable heaviness. Currently, the siege of the four empires had been broken. It was basically the same as the world being at peace. The external threat had been removed, so Yutong could naturally return to a period of peaceful development and recuperation. However, it was precisely at this time that the situation might become more dangerous. This was because once the external threat had been removed, what was left was internal strife. Yutong's internal strife was inevitable. Even if the current emperor had recovered and was in his prime, many of the princes had already grown up. Now that the external threat had been removed, the problem that they had to face now was the appointment of a successor. This was a problem that could not be avoided. Especially when Yutong was about to face a long period of peace. His Majesty was in good health, and his cultivation was not weak either. It seemed that he could still rule for a few more decades, but could the princes wait that long? According to Marquis Yun's judgment, they definitely could not. Then, what they had to face was the change of Shao Wall. Chapter 523. Perhaps the invasion of the army would cause the people to be plunged into misery, or even annihilate the nation, but as long as it was not completely annihilated, Yutong's internal core would be more cohesive, and there would be a day when it would regain its glory. However, internal strife that originated from within would not only cause the people to be plunged into misery. Each time the imperial authority was shaken, it would cause a massive reshuffle in the nation. Even when the matter had come to an end, there would still be follow-up matters to follow up on. Now that the external factors were gone and Marquis Yun had returned to Yutong's capital, His Majesty the Emperor would never allow his brother to stay out of the matter and be truly free and unfettered. Do you want to rest and not care about anything? How could it be so easy? Do you think that you can be free and unfettered just because you're called Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao? How could it be so easy? Marquis Yun could already foresee the mountains that he would have to carry on his shoulders when he returned to the capital. Yun Yang's considerations were similar to Marquis Yun's, but Yun Yang had considered more than Marquis Yun. This was because Yun Yang knew a huge secret that Marquis Yun did not, the eldest royal grandson of Yutong's current royal family, the only son of his elder brother Supreme Earth and Supreme Water. Yu Qinkuan. This was a matter of great importance. In fact, Yin Yang did not pay much attention to the prince's fight for the throne. Whoever was disobedient, he would just kill them. Yun Yang's thoughts were as simple as that. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base, there was no one in the entire Yutong who could stop him from doing anything. That's right, anything. To Yun Yang, as long as he was his backing, his precious nephew's throne would be secured. It was unshakable, so there was no need for him to pay too much attention to it. What he was really concerned about was something else, old Dugu's revenge. He had to avenge this. He had to find the one with the surname Ouyang and target him. He had to return 10 or 100 times more of what old Dugu had suffered that day to that person. Other than that, there was a third matter, the Mai sect. Although his evaluation of the Mai sect had worsened due to the previous battle, he had made a vow to heaven, so he had to fulfill it no matter what. Since the Mai sect looked down on us and would rather break the vow to participate in the world hegemony, they had to bear the consequences. Let me spend some effort to help your grandmaster clean up the sect. However, compared to the fourth matter, the first three seemed insignificant. The fourth matter was the one that had been on Yun Yang's mind. Why isn't King moving at all here? Is God blind? Ha ha ha. I'm even happier hearing that you haven't broken through. How can God be blind? It's God that has eyes. Why is it only God that has eyes? It's God that has eyes. Otherwise, why would God bless the kind and not the scoundrels? Who the CK are you calling scoundrels? All of you are gloating over my misfortune. Do you have any shame? When Yin Yang came in, the four of them were laughing amongst themselves. No, to be precise, the three of them were laughing. Dong Tianlong, Xia Bingchuan, and Chen Wanfeng were beaming with delight while Qiu Yunsan was sulking. Congratulations, four brothers, Yun Yang said with a grin. Yin Yang said with a grin, the four of you have made a great contribution in this battle. At the very least, you have beheaded thousands of people. This is a real military achievement. If you report it, you will definitely be given the title of a general. As the eldest, I am honored as well. I shall congratulate the four generals first. Upon hearing Yun Yang's words, the four men's faces turned green, no longer showing the slightest hint of smugness. General? What general? Why are we going to be generals? What's this all about? Dong Tianlong asked in horror. I want to leave immediately. Who wants to be a general? Qiu Yunsan cried out in grief. Me too. Me too. This isn't a place for humans to live. There's even a fixed time to pee here. I'd rather die than stay here. Chen Wanfeng was so agitated that he was tearing up. Whoever wants to be a general can be one. I'm not going to be one. Xia Bingchuan looked aggrieved. Once I think about living like this every day, your father feels that death is better than living. I'd rather be chased out without contributing anything than live like this. Dong Tianlong said helplessly. Ha ha ha. Yin Yang guffawed. All right. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? Just go on your way. Don't worry, I won't force you to enlist in the army anymore. Look at how scared you all are. How King useless. Yin Yang was genuinely happy. These four buffoons would always bring him joy that came from the bottom of their hearts. Really? Boss, are you serious? Qiu Yunsan looked at Yun Yang helplessly. But my uncle. Yin Yang shook his head and said with a smile, leave your uncle to me, your boss. Actually, none of you were as useless in this war as you've said. At the very least, you didn't run away even when you were in the most dangerous of situations. Instead, you did your best to protect old Marshal Chiu and fought on the front line. Everyone saw this with their own eyes. No one will ever think of you as the popinjays you used to be. Yin Yang said seriously, we're all brothers, we're straightforward with our words. I really understand what you're thinking. Although you've always called yourselves popinjays, for brothers, all of you are great. It's my honor to have brothers like you all. The four of them were stunned when they heard him, suddenly lowering their heads in silence. Dong Tianling chuckled humorlessly with his head hanging low. I didn't expect that in boss eyes, we're all great and even feel honored. You've overestimated us, Yun Yang chuckled and said, I know what you're thinking, but when you broaden your horizons, you'll realize that a mere family's power is actually nothing. I believe that all of you will have something much more powerful than this so-called family power that you value so much now and the future. The crux now is, do you all want to have it? Do you all want to walk out from where you are now and work hard to accomplish it? That's all. Just like how, if you didn't participate in the Eastern War personally, can you imagine that you can really be so valiant and not weaker than any of the brave generals on the battlefield? After saying these words, the tent suddenly fell into a deathly silence. Yin Yang retreated quietly. Just like what Yun Yang had said, the four noble young masters were definitely not popinjays like they appeared to be. They might be slippery, cowardly, or they might have all sorts of flaws, but there was one thing that Yun Yang admired the most about them and was willing to get close to them. Their blood was still warm. Their hearts were still warm. They still had dreams. They had the spirit of brotherhood. If all of you can figure it out yourselves, then perhaps, I can give all of you a life that's completely different from the past. Yin Yang thought quietly in his heart, if all of you can't figure it out and don't want to walk out, then there's nothing I can do. I'll still give all of you the greatest assistance when you need it. I thought I wouldn't see anyone as a brother anymore. It turns out that there are still friends in this world that I acknowledge and are worthy of being close to. Chapter 524. In the other tent. This tent was tightly sealed and the entrance was heavily guarded, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The battle was officially over. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan boiled 2 pots of water at once to clean themselves thoroughly before checking the wounds on their bodies. Throughout the series of battles, the 2 girls had fought with all they had, never wanting to fall behind. Naturally, the wounds they had sustained were not few. Although they were not fatal or crippled, to girls who were born with a penchant for beauty, even a single scar on their bodies was an unbearable agony. Now, they had to wash themselves to see if the scars would affect the beauty of their skin and if they could be removed completely. From head to toe, from arms to legs, from chest to back, Yu Rulan's sighs could be heard incessantly. There's a scar here on my shoulder. Sigh, it's quite deep. Even if it heals in the future, it'll still leave a scar. Sigh. There's another one here on the collarbone. I'm so mad, there should be 3 on the back. Why is there 1 on the lower abdomen? I'm so mad. I'm so mad. There's 1 on my butt as well. There's 1 on my calf. Lingxi, I'm so mad. Look at the ones at the back, can they be removed? I'm so mad, Yu Rulan nagged, frantic and exasperated, no longer as calm and composed as she usually was. It seemed that beauty was indeed what women cared about the most. It was useless no matter how beautiful they usually were. However, she did not hear any movement from Ji Lingxi after nagging for a long time. She could not help but raise her head. You. Ah. Suddenly, she cried out, You. How did you? Ji Lingxi, who was standing opposite her, was also shocked. She was so shocked that she could not speak, completely dumbfounded. Arg, Yu Rulan stared at Ji Lingxi in front of her, almost going mad with jealousy. She sprung up from the basin and pressed Ji Lingxi into the water. You. I remember that you were injured more than me, much more. Why aren't there any scars on your body? Not even a little bit? I don't believe you. Let me take a closer look and check. Turn me over. Let me see, let me see. Ji Lingxi pressed her hand against her chest and said meekly, I don't know. I've really been hurt before. Arg. Yu Rulan cried out in jealousy. This was because Ji Lingxi's body was as smooth as a sheet. There was not even a scratch on her. Yes, even just a little bit. It was even more tender and smooth than a newborn baby's, perfect and flawless. It was as if she had never suffered any injuries since she was young. Not even a trace of martial arts practice could be found on her body. Yu Rulan's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she searched carefully, her gaze filled with disbelief and disbelief. She remembered clearly that when Ji Lingxi was surrounded by the enemy with her, there were many times when she had seen Ji Lingxi injured with her own eyes, with blood splattering and wounds all over her body. When it came to killing the enemy, Ji Lingxi was more desperate than he was. Naturally, she had suffered more injuries than he had, much more. Just now, Yu Rulan was still thinking about how to console Ji Lingxi about not caring about the scar. Would it be better if she appeared more concerned about it? Who would have thought that she would be the one who was deeply agitated? No, she was the one who had suffered the most severe injury. There was not even a wound the size of a strand of hair on Ji Lingxi's body. Faced with such a cruel reality, Yu Rulan broke down. She was extremely doubtful of her own eyes. Could it be that he had seen wrongly back then? However, the arrow that day had clearly hit Lingxi's shoulder. He had fought the enemy with all his might, then pulled the arrow out and tended to Lingxi's wound. Although the wound was not fatal, it was a deep one. Ji Lingxi was fine, but he was already distressed by it. How could it be now? How could it be now? There was also the saber mark. The wound was clearly on Ji Lingxi's upper arm. Her arm had almost been chopped off. It was also the wound that she had bandaged. It could not be a serious injury. Where had the saber mark gone? That strike, what was going on now? What was going on? Don't wear it. Yu Rulan yelled when she saw Ji Lingxi standing up to put on her clothes. I want to check more carefully. I don't believe it, I don't believe it. She looked and looked again and again, touching Ji Lingxi until her entire body was burning up, but there was not a single scar to be found. What the hell is going on? It's too mysterious. Yu Rulan sat in the basin in a daze, unconsciously looking at the scars on her body. Looking at Ji Lingxi's skin that was like a freshly peeled egg, she fell into a deep perplexity. I suddenly feel that this world is filled with deep malice towards me. Yu Rulan said in a tone that was bordering on despair. Ji Lingxi chuckled as she put on her clothes, blushing. Sister Lan had touched her all over like a female gangster just now. Ji Lingxi felt like she was going to give in. She bit her lip and said, I don't know what's going on either. The scars are gone anyway. I was worried. Sister Yu, what do you think is going on? Yu Rulan said in grief and indignation, how would I know what's going on? This shouldn't be. I saw so many scars, why are they gone now? Sister Lan, you seem to mind that I don't have any scars on me. Ji Lingxi pouted. Yu Rulan said angrily, of course I mind. We were hurt together. Look at how messy my body is while yours is smooth and smooth. How can I feel? Ji Lingxi rolled her eyes and said, actually, it's nothing. What's the big deal? I'll let you touch me more in the future, just treat it as your own. Yu Rulan was enraged. Ji Lingxi. Then, Ji Lingxi's giggling and pleading voice could be heard. Outside the tent. Yin Yang rubbed his nose and turned to leave. He had wanted to come over to comfort the two ladies when he saw their condition, but he had come across such an erotic scene. Yin Yang had only listened to them and he almost felt his blood boil. If he had rashly asked to see them just now, he would most likely have been beaten up by the two women who flew into a rage out of humiliation, right? Yin Yang had wisely chosen to leave. However, Yin Yang had the same doubts as Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan. He listened to Shangguan Lingxiu's words. Go and take a look at Lady Ji and Lady Yu. Both of them have suffered quite a lot of injuries, some of them are rather serious. I'm afraid they'll leave scars. That's something a girl can't accept the most. You. Shangguan Lingxiu said. Then Sister Lingxiu, don't you have any scars on you? Yin Yang asked in concern, are they serious? Do you want me to take a look? Get out. Young Master Yun Yang, the little lover, left with his tail between his legs. Then, he came here and coincidentally ran into the two ladies discussing scars. Therefore, young Master Yun did not even go in this time and left with his tail between his legs. Yun Yang believed that if he had gone in, the treatment he would receive would not be any better than what Shangguan Lingxiu had told him to get out. Perhaps, it would be many times worse. Chapter 525. Lingxi. Young Master Yun, you have to hold on tight. I think things aren't looking good. This Lady Shangguan is a great threat to you, a formidable foe, Yu Rulan whispered into Ji Lingxi's ear, wrapped in the blanket. How can I hold on tight to such a thing? Ji Lingxi was annoyed at the mention of it. That Yun Yang is a block of wood. He doesn't know how to flirt at all. He doesn't know, he doesn't understand. No, also, we have to look for Supreme Cloud quickly, to find out about your brother's whereabouts. Yu Rulan's eyes glinted with hope. Maybe, your brother isn't dead yet. He's one of the 9 Supremes, how could he die so easily? Yes, yes. Ji Lingxi nodded vigorously. If we can find him this time. Yu Rulan bit her lip and said, I won't go anywhere. I'll stay by his side. There's no need for any ceremony, wedding, anything. I won't think about family, anything. I'll just keep him company until the end. He wants to be one of the 9 Supremes, he wants to contribute to the country, I'll be by his side. When he's tired, I'll roam the world with him, roam the sea of consciousness. When he wants to settle down, I'll find a quiet place to live in seclusion with him, the man farming and the woman weaving. Yu Rulan's eyes were filled with longing. Ji Lingxi felt a pang in her heart as she hugged Yu Rulan and said sincerely, brother will definitely be fine. He has such a good sister-in-law waiting for him, how can anything happen to him? He'll definitely reunite with us. With you waiting for him, he won't dare to let anything happen to him. Yes, he'll definitely reunite with us. Yu Rulan's voice sounded like a prayer, like an affirmation, but there was also an endless sense of melancholy. Early in the morning, Yun Yang rode on ready, leading the way in the front. It felt more like he was running away, as if he wanted to get away from the group as soon as possible. It was a pity that he was caught by the latecomers before he could run more than 10 miles. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan stood in front of the horses with frosty expressions. What a coincidence. Yun Yang chuckled dryly and said, to be able to meet 2 beautiful ladies on such a chaotic journey, it is truly a blessing from the heavens. Yu Rulan's expression was icy. You're lying through your teeth. Weren't you the one who caused this bluish-black stain on our faces that can't be washed off? May I ask, where did young Master Yun's beauty come from? How can this be considered as God's blessing? Yin Yang chuckled and said, both of you ladies are beautiful, like deities. You're only slightly blemished, what's there to speak of? Besides, even if we don't look at their faces and only look at their silhouettes, their unparalleled elegance and beauty, how can a mere disguise hide them? What else do you have to say to flatter us? Go ahead and say it all at once. Don't stop. It's a long journey anyway, there's still tens of thousands of miles to go until we reach Tiantang City. We'll be in a good mood listening to your flattery along the way. We'll ask you again when we're tired of it. Work hard. Yin Yang shut his mouth, resentfully. I'm flattering you all and I still have to be interrogated by you all. Work hard? What do I have to work hard for? Interrogate me directly. I don't know anything anyway. I don't know anything at all. First of all, the thing on your face, it doesn't really matter, we're too lazy to ask you. It'll fall off on its own after a while anyway. There's no need to waste our interrogation time. Yu Rulan's gaze was like a cold lake in autumn as she stared at Yun Yang's face, scrutinizing his features. Yin Yang coughed and turned away instinctively, not daring to meet a certain someone's aggressive gaze. Turn around and look into my eyes. Don't avoid me, said Yu Rolan. Yin Yang coughed and rubbed his nose, saying, Sister Lan, we're looking at each other. I'm embarrassed. Yu Rolan was amused and annoyed at the same time. She said loudly, even I'm embarrassed. What are you embarrassed about? Turn around quickly and look at me. Yin Yang spread his arms and said directly, what do you all want to know? Just ask directly. If there's anything I can say, I'll definitely say it. Yu Rolan said, alright, where is Ji Lingfeng now? Yin Yang was stunned. What? Yu Rolan said angrily, why are you pretending to be confused? Tell me where Ji Lingfeng is. Sister Yu, you're making things difficult for me. How would I know where Ji Lingfeng is? This is the first time I've heard of this name. If I were in Tiantang City now, I would at least have some influence and could look for help. I could spread out my men to search for him, but this journey back home is filled with strangers and strangers. What do you want me to say? How would I be able to find this person? How would I know where he is? As he said the last sentence, Yin Yang felt an inexplicable twinge in his heart. Yes, I really want to know where eighth brother is now. I really don't know where he is. I really want to know where my brothers are. Yu Rolan snorted angrily. You're playing a rogue with me? You won't give up until you see your coffin, will you? Yin Yang acted like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water, putting on a sincere expression as he said, as if he was bowing from the bottom of his heart, Sister Lan. I really don't know, Ji Lingxi said from the side. Why are your eyeballs rolling around when you don't know? Not only does Sister Yu not believe you now, even I don't believe you anymore. Yin Yang was taken aback. Huh? My eyeballs rolling around? They obviously did just now, answered Ji Lingxi. Yin Yang stared at Ji Lingxi with widened eyes. Are they still rolling now? Not now. Why are you staring so wide? Are you trying to show off your big eyes? Asked Ji Lingxi. Yin Yang asked, what about now? You saw my eyeballs rolling around just now. How did they roll? Ji Lingxi answered, something like this. As she spoke, she tried to demonstrate, but she suddenly realized something and flew into a rage. Pfft. I'm trying to smooth things over for you, but you're using me as a distraction instead. Stop changing the topic. Hurry up and answer the question honestly. Yin Yang said confidently, but my eyeballs didn't roll. They definitely didn't. They did. Ji Lingxi said angrily. They didn't. They did. They just rolled around. If I say they didn't, then they didn't. If I say they did, then they did. Your eyeballs must have rolled at least 7 to 8 times just now. Words alone are no proof. Show me the evidence. Ji Lingxi was stunned. Yin Yang continued to argue, do you think I don't know what's going on with my eyeballs? On what basis do you say that my eyeballs rolled around? Show me the evidence. People who speak irresponsibly and scoundrelly also need evidence. Ji Lingxi almost fainted, her lips quivering as she said, your eyeballs, they were clearly moving, they were just like that. Yu Rolan rolled her eyes at the sky. Sister, we're forcing him to answer questions. All right. Why did your brain follow his train of thought with just one sentence from him? Why are you so calculative about whether your eyeballs rolled around or not? Is this the time to be calculative about that? Let's just say that you didn't, alright? Sister Ling saw wrongly just now, alright? Answer my question quickly. Yu Rolan tried to smooth things over quickly. However, a glance at Ji Lingxi's trembling body rendered her speechless. That won't do. What do you mean by, let's just say it? What do you mean by, alright? Yin Yang was relentless. You're accusing me so wrongly. You want to settle things with just one sentence? There's no such thing in this world. I didn't even roll my eyes just now. Yu Rulan was speechless. You were behaving like that just now. We're already like this, and now you're behaving like this. What do you want? You're King relentless. Do you want to go to heaven? I'm being serious. I'm asking you, Ji Lingfeng, I'm being serious. My eyeballs didn't roll around. I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. I'm asking you, I didn't roll around. I'm an honest man. You're all scoundrels, honest men. Beat him up. Ji Lingxi could not take it anymore. She pounced forward, punching and kicking as she threw everything she had at Yunyang. Yu Rulan's pretty face was flushed with anger as she charged forward as well. She understood now that she would not be able to get anything out of Yunyang if she continued to argue with him. It was better to just fight. However, with Yunyang's current cultivation base, it was a piece of cake for him to deal with the two girls. He did not even need to fight. His protective mystical chi alone was enough to send the girls staggering. Clang! Yu Rulan held her sword in her hand, gleaming with a chilling light. Use weapons. Both of you can't beat me even with weapons. Yunyang was smug, but his expression suddenly changed as he said in terror, You, what are you doing? Don't be rash. It was Yu Rulan who held her sword horizontally. She did not attack Yunyang but placed it against her own neck. Her eyes were filled with determination as she looked at Yunyang. I know we're not enough for you to fight, but if you try to dodge or retaliate, I'll cut my own throat on the spot. Do you think I wouldn't dare? Yunyang was speechless. Chapter 526. What kind of explanation was this? Was this another variant of using death as a threat? What a terrifying attack, so sharp that I have nothing to say. Yes. Ji Lingxi was an intelligent person as well, coming to a realization at once. With a clang, she drew her sword and said, Well said, Sister Yu. If you dare dodge, I'll kill myself. I'll sever my meridians. I'll bang my head against the wall and die in front of you. The corners of Yunyang's lips twitched. And now there was someone who could infer other things from one instance. If you're so capable, why don't you ascend to the heavens? In spite of this, Yunyang dared not make a move. He dared not resist or even dodge. These two ladies before him were eighth brother's younger sister and eighth brother's fiancée. What if they really committed suicide in front of him? Yunyang shuddered. All right. Ask whatever you want. I'll tell you what I know, but I can't do anything about what I don't know. It's useless even if I threaten you with my life. Yunyang looked crestfallen. Yu Rulan's eyes glinted with amusement. You know my question. Perhaps only you know it in this world. Yunyang thought about it and said, I do know a little about it, but I can't say it here. Why? Yu Rulan asked. Yunyang lowered his voice and said, Sister Yu, it's only the war that has stopped now, but we can still be monitored and controlled by people with ulterior motives at every moment, and those people with ulterior motives also want to know the answers to the questions you want to know. So it's best that we don't mention it. We'll talk about it when we reach the capital. Yunyang's expression was unprecedentedly serious. Yu Rulan and Ji Lingxi believed him at once, instinctively believing him at the same time. Yes, the 9 Supremes had just appeared and defeated Dongxuan's army. The people who targeted them that day must have made a move. It was only natural that they, who were related to them, would be under surveillance. After all, the 9 Supremes' enemies were the pinnacle existences of Tianxian continent. They were even more dangerous than Lei Dongtian. Their actions today were really thoughtless, to actually interrogate him so forcefully at a time like this. Luckily, Yunyang did not give in. What if it was too close? The two ladies nodded repeatedly, regret and apologies written all over their faces. Yunyang heaved a secret sigh of relief, knowing that he had passed another hurdle. It was obviously Yunyang's excuse to say that he was being watched. There was no lack of such a possibility, but at least, Yunyang had not sensed anything unusual up until now. If there was someone with ulterior motives, the information that Yu Lingxi had revealed just now was already too much for them to make a move on the spot. The most important reason for Yunyang to say so was that he had yet to think of how to say it. If he told them the truth, he believed that the two women would definitely not be able to accept it. But what should he say, what should he do, and what should he do? Yunyang's mind was a mess. He could not make up his mind no matter how much he thought about it. There was still a long way to go to Tiantang City. With this buffer time, perhaps it would be enough for him to think of an excuse and how to deal with it. Yunyang sighed inwardly. The road ahead was long and full of obstacles. Brothers, how many unexplainable questions have you all left me, but I don't dare to offend anyone, how unlucky. Right after Yunyang left the Fortress of Resilience, the Western troop that had come as reinforcements officially bade farewell to Fu Baogua and returned to the western border. At this moment, every man in the Western troop was carrying at least one bundle on his back, piled high on his back. Some of them were even carrying more than 10 bundles on their backs. The whole troop was like this, and it was a sight to behold. Of course, there were also soldiers who did not carry parcels. They were all injured and their injuries were not light, making it difficult for them to move. They were placed on the hundreds of carriages that had been temporarily conscripted. However, even the injured lying on the carriages still carried a few parcels in their arms. These parcels were filled with the remains of their comrades, their brothers, and their comrades. They didn't want to put their brothers' corpses on the cold carriages. They would rather carry them on their backs all the way back to bring their comrades back. They were all living people, just like him, alive and well. Sun Zihu looked at the troop behind him, his rugged face already wet with tears. The chilly wind continued to howl. Sun Zihu stood on his horse and turned his head to look back. The return journey had begun, but he was reluctant to leave for a long time. 150,000 Western elite troops had come as reinforcements. Now that the war had ended, they were finally going back. However, only 30,000 of the 150,000 brothers who had come as reinforcements could go back with him. No, to be more specific, it should be 29,653 people. It was not even 30,000. More than 120,000 Western warriors had been buried in front of the Fortress of Resilience. How do I explain this to the brothers who are waiting in the Western troop? Sun Zihu cried. How do I explain this to the marshal? 120,000 brothers, how do I explain this to their families? You have fought for the country and sacrificed your lives here. It is the blood of men, but those of us who have survived are infinitely more miserable. Brothers, our souls have returned, we have returned home, brothers, it's time to go home. The 30,000 Western men screamed at the top of their lungs. Their cries were heart-wrenching, their sorrowful voices echoing above the battlefield. The clouds in the sky were low, the winds howling. It was as if the 120,000 heroic souls were gathering and lining up in a military formation, preparing to follow their brothers home. The bleak sound of the horn echoed on the snowfield for a long time. The 30,000 soldiers of the Western Army were all silent. Along the way, aside from the sound of footsteps, horses' hooves, the occasional neighing of healthy horses, and the fluttering of flags, no one else said a single word. Only the formation remained orderly. The footsteps were still majestic and high-spirited, as if the brothers who had gone to eternal rest were still in the formation, making the long journey home with him. They were still by his side, never abandoning him. He seemed to be able to hear their breathing and smell the strong stench of sweat on their bodies. It was a smell that he had been most reluctant to smell in the past. They were the same as him. All of them were silent, silently moving forward, using their own footsteps to create a heroic melody. Behind him, in front of the faraway Fortress of Resilience, Fu Baogua led the remnants of the Eastern troop and lined up neatly. Salute! Send the Western brothers off. Fu Baogua hollered as the entire Eastern troop raised their hands in unison. Every soldier at the Eastern Front stared at the silhouettes of the Western Front Army as they walked away. Their hands that were raised to salute were never lowered. As the Western troop walked, they gradually moved further away. Suddenly, someone in the formation began to sob softly. This sorrowful atmosphere quickly spread throughout the entire army. In less than 100 breaths of time, the Western army was filled with sobbing and choking sounds. Sun Zihu continued to advance in silence, as if he didn't ask anything, but in reality, his chest simply felt as if it would explode at any moment. He panted heavily, and after forcefully suppressing it for a moment, he couldn't hold it in any longer. He suddenly roared, "What are you crying for? Are you all king women? Our brothers died fighting for our country, they died a worthy death. They are all heroes. All heroes. Do you know what heroes are? Why are you all crying? We should be proud. We have such good brothers, we." Towards the end, Sun Zihu's roaring voice suddenly stopped, as if he had been forcefully torn apart. He abruptly rolled off his horse, sprawled on the ground, and wailed bitterly. He no longer had any image to speak of. He clutched at his chest and felt his heart shatter into pieces. The pain pierced his heart and lungs. "It's fine if we die together, but there are so many casualties. How are we going to explain this to the marshal when we return? Explaining to the marshal is secondary. How are we going to face our own hearts?" Sun Zihu's tears streamed down his face. No matter what, they still had to walk on this path. They had to go back eventually. When the commander-in-chief heard that the situation on his side was not going well, he sent a messenger eagle to inform them that he had sold all his assets and gathered all the money of the entire army. Together with the silver he had earned from his assets, the money would be distributed equally to the families of the deceased brothers in the name of all the officers and soldiers of the Western Army after the country compensated them. This was in line with Sun Zihu's understanding of his marshal, but at the same time, he also knew that the marshal's estimation of the war was not going well and the loss of manpower was greatly off. He had asked in a serious tone in his letter, "Are there still 110 to 30,000 brothers who can fight now? What are the casualties? Why was there no report?" Sun Zihu did not reply to the inquiry in the letter because he really did not know how to reply. If the marshal knew that less than 30,000 of the elites of the Western troop he had brought with him could follow him back in the end. Such a tragic war, such a cruel reality. How would the marshal feel at that moment? If he vented his anger on Sun Zihu, that would be fine. Whether he reprimanded him or beat him up, Sun Zihu would have no complaints even if he killed him. What he was afraid of was that the commander, who had a fiery temper and loved his soldiers like his own children, would vomit blood on the spot and faint. Sun Zihu's eyes were streaming with tears, his heart was weeping blood. It was better to send his brothers back first before anything else. When they entered the territory of Yutang's border, the towns and cities along the way gradually increased and became denser. Whether it was Yunyang and the Western troop, when they passed by, there were countless people waiting at the entrance of each town or city, even if they did not take the same route. There were the elderly, children, women, and the young among the people waiting. They had prepared delicious dishes and boiled hot water. When they saw the army coming from afar, they went forward spontaneously to deliver food, drinks, and clothes to the soldiers. They had given them the best consolation they could at the moment. There were also people who looked worried as they asked carefully, "Sir, do you know how Yutang's Eastern Troop's 3rd Troop is doing?" "My third son is there. There's no news until now." "I know I shouldn't ask about this. One should be fearless when fighting for the country, but I just want to keep this in mind. General, do you know about the 4th Troop of the Steel Cavalry? My husband is a centurion in the Iron Cavalry. Right now, he's... Although no news is good news, we still need some concrete news. Only then can we be at ease, isn't it?" "You?" A beautiful young married woman with a protruding belly nervously asked. "General, do you know Lu Sanhu?" A young girl with a delicate and pretty face was flushed as she rubbed her braid. "I'm his fiancée. His parents are old, and they can't walk properly. I will be thick-skinned and ask if he's doing well. I've promised him that I'll get married when I come back." The girl was as pretty as a flower, her cheeks flushed and her eyes watery. She was bashful, but she asked bravely. Her gaze was filled with longing. It was longing for married life. Yin Yang felt like his chest had been hammered. Sir, do you know, General, do you know? Countless people approached cautiously, their faces ingratiating but their eyes were filled with apprehension. Their questions were so humble. Even their voices were trembling when they asked. They were eager to know the answer, but there was fear flickering in their eyes. While they were eager to hear news of their loved ones, they were also afraid of hearing bad news. Yin Yang and the rest were silent, not knowing how to answer. Yin Yang and the rest were silent, not knowing how to answer. Countless veterans who were carrying parcels on their backs tried their best to hide the parcels, hunching their backs as they hid them in their arms. We've won. Dong Xian has been defeated and has retreated. The news of your families will come soon. They're all good men who protected their homes and country. We've won. Dong Xian has been defeated, they've retreated. News of your families will come soon. They're all good men who protect their homes and country. Marquis Yun pacified them. There are too many people participating in the Eastern defense this time. We are truly sorry that we can't recognize all of them, my fellow countrymen, please don't be impatient. Heaven helps the worthy, I believe that your loved ones will return safely. When Marquis Yun said these words, he wished he could slap himself hard on his own face. How hypocritical he was to say such words that went against his own conscience. Being an emperor, being approachable and winning over people's hearts was a compulsory course for the royal children. Marquis Yun was no exception. However, now that he had uttered these words that were originally at his fingertips, it was so king heart-wrenching. It turned out that being approachable was actually not a compliment. It was clearly the biggest fake head. Dong Xian had participated in this battle with almost 3 million men while Yutong had deployed more than 1 million men. When the battle ended, Dong Xian was left with less than 400,000 men. It was almost a tenth of their number. On Yutong's side, there were less than 200,000 survivors, including the eastern and western troops and the martial world's reinforcements. In other words, after this series of battles, there were 4 million men from both sides, and only 600,000 were left alive. The remaining 3,400,000 were all gone. Who could guarantee that someone was still alive with such a horrifying ratio of casualties? At this moment, the so-called comfort was perhaps the greater devastation before they received the bad news. What could be more unbearable than the despair after receiving hope? Out of 10 households, at least 7 or 8 of these villagers who had participated in the war, what awaited them in the end would only be sorrow and despair. Thinking of this, the villagers could not swallow the fragrant dishes that the villagers had sent to them. They felt like something was stuck in their throats. Despite the strong sincerity before them, they could not swallow it. Even their own hearts were torn apart by the pain. Facing those expectant gazes and listening to those careful and perturbed questions, everyone felt that they were already hard-hearted enough to not burst into tears on the spot, all the way back. What they faced along the way was the same scene. Their hearts were torn apart again and again, over and over again. The army was already far away. However, the people who were waiting at the entrance of the village were still waiting there. They looked at the road in the distance in a daze, hoping that in the next moment, their sons, their brothers, their husbands, would gallop over, covered in dust, and announce to them, "I'm back." They were waiting, today, 4,500, not even 2 chapters. Chapter 527. The news of the Eastern Front's victory had been relayed back to the capital city. His Majesty was overjoyed when he heard the news. He had long predicted that the Eastern Front would not fare well and had even thought of personally leading the army to support the Eastern Front. However, old Marshal Qiu had already taken most of the elites in Tiantang City, including the royal guards. Even if he were to lead the army personally, there was no one else he could use. In addition, the timing of the 4 countries' attack was too sudden. Even if there were reinforcements in Tiantang City, it would be beyond their reach. Unexpectedly, the final report from the Eastern Front was a complete victory. Even Dongxuan's marshal, Han Sanhe, had died on the spot. This result was a long sigh of relief for Yutong's emperor. However, he was silent for a long time after asking about the casualties on his side. It had only been a short war of 2 to 3 months, but millions of warriors had died in the battle. Even if he was the ruler of Yutong, the emperor who held the entire world in his hands, he could still feel the throbbing pain. The pain was excruciating. Millions of warriors. His Majesty heaved a long sigh, tears welling up in his eyes. All the warriors who perished in the battlefield were loyal warriors who protected the country. On the day of victory, I shall welcome them 100 miles out of the city. I shall welcome these warriors personally. I wonder how old Xiao is doing now. Inform the Board of War and the Board of Revenue to reward the meritorious officials handsomely. As for the warriors who perished in the battle, give them the highest standard of pension. I shall be personally involved in all matters related to this war. Inform the Board of Appointments that they shall not be stingy in rewarding the meritorious warriors. Inform the Board of Rights to welcome the meritorious warriors back to the imperial court with the highest scale. It must be done quickly. I shall host this welcome personally. Announce this great news to the world. Order the Ministry of Justice to launch a nationwide crackdown, focusing on the bullies and hooligans who run amok in the villages. Those who bully the families of the fallen soldiers will be punished 3 times more severely. There will be no leniency and no pardon. His Majesty was a military man who had come from the military. He knew very well what the warriors needed the most. He knew what he wanted the most, what the soldiers were most worried about, and what the dead heroes missed the most. Therefore, his first reaction after receiving the news was to start from the most practical direction. The last order to convey the Ministry of Justice's decree was personally written by the emperor and stamped with the imperial seal. He also stamped his own personal seal under the imperial seal. This was a unique exception in the process of drafting imperial edicts. This seemingly unceremonious action clearly revealed His Majesty's attitude towards this matter. He wanted to use his actions to show that he wanted all the officials in the world to know that he wasn't just talking about this matter, but was personally supervising it. Anyone who dared to abuse the law for personal gain would not only face punishment from their superiors, but also the wrath of His Majesty. If you want to act rashly, come at me. Who would dare to bear the wrath of the emperor? Once the emperor was enraged, corpses would float for 1,000 miles. From today onwards, build a heroic spirit shrine. From today onwards, the Hall of Meritorious Service shall be rebuilt. From today onwards, the national liquidation will begin. His Majesty's series of orders almost drove the eunuch to death. His Majesty's tone was especially harsh when he said the last 4 words, national liquidation. No one in the world was optimistic about Yutong's chances in this 4-nation siege, be it in the imperial court or the commoners. Compared to the commoners and martial artists who were eager to join the war and face the national crisis together, many tycoons, businessmen, and wealthy families were making their own calculations. There were even many who were waiting for the opportunity to use their connections to contact the dignitaries of other countries. If the Dongxian army were to invade Yutong, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was also because of this that these people and forces turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to Yutong's official donations and the military's predicament. There were also many officials who began to plan for their own escape route when they saw the dire situation. If Yutong were to be destroyed, where would they go? There were questions like these. Before the war, when Yutong's forces looked like they were in a precarious situation, His Majesty had not been too forceful towards the fence-sitters. Firstly, he was afraid that it would incite a revolt among the people, both internally and externally. Secondly, even His Majesty thought that it was understandable for them to seek a way out under such circumstances. Although he was furious, annoyed, and eager to kill them, these people had yet to do anything that would truly bring disaster to the nation and its people. If Yutong were to be destroyed, then let those who had already found a way out go. Why must they be exterminated? They were his people after all, it was better to leave them a way out. However, the situation now was completely different. His Majesty was exceptionally clear about one thing: Yutang's eastern front had defeated Dongxian, the Four Nations siege had been completely broken, and even the continent's top god of war, Han Sanhe, had been killed. Did it not mean that Yutang would unify Tianxian and become the once-in-a-lifetime hegemon? It was no longer a joke. It was already here. This opportunity was about to be grasped in his hands. There was no need to be merciful to those who were disloyal and unjust to the nation. Mercy would only leave a hidden threat, a scourge. Therefore, His Majesty began to punish them heavily. How did the saying go again? One must first pacify the internal affairs before dealing with external affairs. His Majesty wanted to ensure that Yutang was a complete piece of iron when he sent out his troops to conquer the world. Therefore, these unstable factors had to be eliminated early, or at least, they had to be pushed out. If these people were to be left alive, their current channels could very well become channels for leaking military intelligence when the war broke out in the future. Perhaps it would be easier for spies from other nations to break through. An emperor who did not keep secrets would lose his official, an official who did not keep secrets would lose his life, one who did not keep secrets would cause harm. It was necessary to take precautions. On the way back, Yun Yang had executed His Majesty's edict that had yet to be conveyed thoroughly. He was even more thorough than what the edict had said, turning into 3 gods of slaughter together with Fang Mafei and Bai Shue. Yun Yang had even instigated his cheapskate father. Every time the 4 experts, including Marquis Yun, arrived at a place, they would send out their spies to scout out all the local ruffians and gangsters within a 1,000-mile radius. They would then follow the map and kill them. Who were Yun Yang and the other 3 experts? For Heaven Realm cultivators, they represented the highest achievement of Yutang's cultivators. The targets they targeted would only have death awaiting them. There was no chance of survival. The bullies who usually ran amok in the villages and preyed on the people could not even wait to be punished by the nation's law. Their heads had already rolled to the ground. 90% of these people's family assets had been plundered. With Yun Yang and the others' status, they really should not have resorted to such barbaric, unreasonable, bloody, and cruel methods. In spite of this, Yun Yang had made up his mind to continue the massacre. He knew that these people were the root of Yutang's cancer that needed to be eradicated. These people were tyrannical and unscrupulous to their own people, but they were servile and spineless to the outside world. This was the classic example of bullying the weak and fearing the strong. After this war, there would be many more lonely old people, orphans, and widows in the country. They would lose their protection after this war because they had lost the pillars of their families. Perhaps, for a certain period of time, no one would dare make a move against them because of their heroic aura. However, after a period of time, these people would definitely be reduced to the lowest rung of society. They would be bullied and humiliated without any ability to fight back. Humans had always been the most forgetful animals. Everything was over once a person was dead. These 5 words were never just for show. Therefore, Yun Yang was willing to lower himself to be an executioner, the kind of executioner who was merciless and merciless. Chapter 528. As Yun Yang's targets were too broad, even Marquis Yun felt his hands going soft from the killing. However, Yun Yang still collected information with a steely expression and urged the few of them to go out to kill and plunder every night. Isn't it a little too extreme? Not everyone with a bad record has to be killed, right? Marquis Yun grew increasingly uneasy and tried to persuade Yun Yang more than once. A dog can't change its spots. Even if we know that some people can change, what if they don't and cause trouble in the future? I'm not willing to bet on what if. Because we might not notice or encounter these things in the future. It's better to nip it in the bud. Although we bear this bad reputation today and bear many sins, we can let millions of orphans and widows who died in the war live in peace for at least 8 to 10 years. With this buffer time, it'll be enough for the children to grow up and become the new pillar of the family. Yin Yang said faintly, even if I can't bear to do it, even if it's too harsh, even if many of the targets don't deserve death, it's better to kill them all. At least, it can put the souls of those who died in the war at ease. That's enough. That's why I kill without any psychological burden. There's another reason. Yutong has been at war for years and the treasury is empty. After this war, I'm afraid the treasury won't even be able to fork out enough compensation, let alone more rewards, Yunyang said. We'll kill and plunder along the way. When we return to the capital, we'll be able to contribute at least hundreds of millions of silver taels to the treasury. With this additional sum of money, we'll be able to solve the treasury's urgent need. Marquis Yun chuckled dryly. It's not just urgent. We've only walked less than 3,000 miles, but the silver taels we've plundered have already reached as high as 70 million silver taels. The further we go, the wealthier the targets we target will be. Not to mention the places near the capital, there will be hundreds of millions of them. We won't be able to stop them at all. It's better if we can't stop them, the more the better. Yunyang said faintly, Marquis Yun, I don't know if you've seen it, but usually in a village, the family of such a bully is usually much, much wealthier than the average family. How much of it is the blood and sweat of the people? I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It is precisely because these people are hated and feared by everyone that it is easy for them to do anything, almost without any scruples. That's why they amassed so much wealth in such a short period of time. These years, morals have been deteriorating day by day. People are no longer what they used to be. There's a saying going around in many places. Yin Yang was silent for a moment before he said, murder and arson have gold belts. Repairing bridges and paving roads leaves no corpses. Hearing this, Marquis Yun could not help falling silent. That was because he had heard these two phrases not just once, but countless times in his travels. What kind of resentment and helplessness must there be to spread these two phrases among the people? Yin Yang said coldly, accumulating virtue and doing good are actually not as good as bandits and tyrants. Repairing bridges and paving roads is nothing compared to arson and murder. The appearance of this phenomenon in itself is a kind of moral decay of the entire country. And the people we've killed are only the first of these two sentences. Yin Yang said, our bloody massacre this time is indeed using violence against violence, but it will also tell the people that good will be rewarded with good and evil with evil. It's not that retribution hasn't come, it's that the time hasn't come. We'll let the people know that there are still benefits to accumulating virtue and doing good, repairing bridges and paving roads. Although God can't see it, there are still those in power or heroes who can. This is the main reason why I've persevered in my massacre this time. I'll use blood and slaughter to tell our people that God has eyes. In the distant imperial court, there's another pair of eyes watching over this world. There will never be a situation where the emperor is far away. Yin Yang lifted his gaze and looked at Marquis Yun. So, not only do we have to shoulder this sin, we have to shoulder it more and continue to shoulder it. Marquis Yun's emotions turned to agitation as he panted heavily and said in a low voice, that's right. That's right. We have to shoulder it. More of it. God may forgive us, but we won't. He looked at Yun Yang with unusual relief and said ruefully, Yun Yang, tell me, if you were really my son, how great would that be? Yun Yang pursed his lips and said, forget it. You don't even have a wife now. Isn't it too much to worry about your son? Marquis Yun was exasperated. Could he not be so harsh with his words? However, Marquis Yun, who no longer bore any psychological burden, had a swift change in attitude. He was initially hesitant, but now he was ruthless and merciless as he went on a killing spree. What Yin Yang could not stand the most was that Marquis Yun had turned into a miser. How much did you rob today? Marquis Yun asked by Ishua, where's the silver? Where is it? Give it to me. All of it. What about you? Where did you rob it? Give it to me. All of it. And you? Marquis Yun looked at Yun Yang. The houses in the direction you're heading to are the richest. Take it out quickly, don't pocket it, understand? Yin Yang, Bai Shue, and Fang Mafei were speechless. Do you know? Do you know that our plan of robbing the rich to give to the poor has already collected 65 million silver taels? Marquis Yun looked excited. Even when the national treasury was at its most abundant, there wasn't so much money. It's really a lot of money. Yin Yang was speechless. Robbing the rich to give to the poor. Robbing the rich is true, but does your so-called giving to the poor really work? Who are you giving to? All the money is still in your pocket, not a single cent less. Are you that poor? Marquis Yun's current state is indeed very poor, a very talkative one. Marquis Yun was showing a side of him that no one knew about, calculating his debts. We're still 3,700 miles away from Tiantang City. Let's work harder and try to work overtime within these 3,700 miles. Our target is 100 million silver taels. You must accomplish this goal. Even if you don't sleep, rest, you must achieve it. It doesn't matter if we kill a few more people. These people should have been killed a long time ago anyway. We must be careful when we kill them and confiscate their possessions. Don't miss out on any treasures. Yun Yang felt ill all of a sudden. What we're doing is for the benefit of the nation and its people, all right? Why does it sound like we've all become thieves all of a sudden? Thieves with strict discipline at that? Hearing Marquis Yun's declaration, the group's enthusiasm, especially the sense of achievement of serving the nation and its people, was immediately reduced by half. It was rather dull now. When you're arranging the search list, why don't you expand the scope of the operation to 2,000 miles? Marquis Yun said excitedly, only 1,000 miles is too small. We'll have to put in a little more effort, but the benefits are obvious. Lots and lots of money. Oh my God, where did the previous Marquis Yun go? Help. Yin Yang felt like he was trapped in a cocoon of his own making. He was digging his own grave. He couldn't bear the consequences of his own actions. When the time comes, throw this money in front of His Majesty. He'll die of joy. Marquis Yun guffawed. What if he asks you where the money came from? Will you tell him that you've killed tens of thousands of people along the way for this money? Yin Yang asked. He'll definitely punish you. Punish me? Would he dare to punish me? Marquis Yun pursed his lips. We're born from the same root. He's the emperor while your father is wandering the martial world and suffering. I've only seen my biological father once in my lifetime and he was king indifferent. Until now, I'm still doing my best for him and my identity can't even be exposed. Would he dare to punish me? If he dares to punish me, I'll swap places with him. I've spoiled him so much that he dares to punish me. Doesn't he know who your father is? Marquis Yun was furious. Yin Yang was speechless. Who can tell me where the elegant and carefree Marquis beyond the heavens, dressed in green, has gone? Chapter 529. Tiantang City, on the other hand, was also in a state of sorrow and joy. Countless citizens were anticipating the return of the victorious team. They hoped for the return of the victorious team. But in their hearts, there was an indescribable worry and apprehension that lingered in their hearts. How were their relatives in the army now? Were they safe and sound? In spite of this, there were more people who were overjoyed, the joy of victory and the relief of no longer being threatened. That was a complete relaxation of the body and mind, a complete safety. The so-called peace and joy was nothing more than this. The entire Tiantang city was decorated in red. The city gates were filled with gongs and drums as troops prepared to welcome the victorious warriors returning from the battlefield. A long red carpet was laid all the way from the city gates, stretching endlessly into the horizon. On this day, His Majesty personally led the civil and military officials to welcome the return of old Marshal Qiu Jianhan. It was no longer a simple greeting at the city gates this time. It was not a greeting 10 miles away, but 100 miles away from the city. It was already an honor to be welcomed by the emperor himself. Usually, it was already a great honor to welcome the emperor at the palace gates. To welcome the emperor at the city gates, one could only do so if one had meritorious service. As for welcoming the emperor 10 miles away from the city gates, it could only be done by those who had meritorious service to protect the nation and its people. A ruler of a nation might not even have such a dynasty even if he had experienced one. As for His Majesty, the Emperor of Yutong, who had traveled 100 miles to welcome him, it had never happened since the beginning of time. It was hard to say if there would be a successor, but it was definitely unprecedented. Originally, when the emperor proposed to welcome the returning soldiers from 100 miles away, many people in the court objected, especially the people from the Board of Rights. They said that this method was too excessive. However, the emperor acted arbitrarily and made the final decision. He suppressed all the voices of opposition and forcefully suppressed them. An exception? How could it be an exception? Yutong's borders have been warring all over. More than 1 million warriors have died in this war and millions of loyal souls have returned. It is only right for me to welcome them from 1,000 miles away. As the ruler of Yutong, how can I only care about enjoying peace? I should covet the lives of the people and fear the death of a son. However, what's the point of moving out to welcome you? I feel that the courtesy isn't enough and that it will chill the hearts of the loyal souls. Who else in this 10,000 miles of territory will be willing to risk their lives? The cold wind was howling, and the first snow was falling. The emperor, dressed in a bright yellow robe, stood with his hands behind his back in the wind and snow. Looking at the road ahead, he did not move at all. He quietly waited for the warriors who protected the country to return. Yun Yang, Marquis Yun, Fang Mafei, and Bai Ishua plundered, no, enforced justice on behalf of heaven, robbing the rich to help the poor. Finally, they were about to reach Tiantang City. Tiantang City's territory will be about 500 miles ahead. This road is finally coming to an end. Marquis Yun smiled in satisfaction. Along the way, we've really managed to gather 100 million silver taels. That's enough. He rested for a moment and packed his luggage. Everyone tried to make themselves look more spirited. When they were close enough, they would rest and reorganize themselves. After that, you must enter Tiantang City with your best spirits. You must not lose your edge. All right. Yin Yang believed that after these 2 rounds of rest and reorganization, the returning army would be refreshed and return to its peak state. Right, don't just pick up your belongings. Remember to wash the flags that accompanied the army. It's best if they're clean. Marquis Yun said, since we've returned victorious, we can't allow any stains. There's no need to leave any traces of war on them. We're the victors, we're the winners. We have to do everything right. Yin Yang wanted to clap and applaud Marquis Yun's way of doing things. Silence spoke louder than words, it was extremely brilliant. Historically, when an army returned victorious, the main general would usually do one thing: they would not tidy up the army and return with a battered army. The flags, armaments, weapons, and even the horses were filled with blood stains, and broken pieces. It was to let everyone see how cruel the war this army had been through. This was to show off their contributions. From a certain perspective, it was also to ask for rewards. When the emperor saw it, he would definitely reward them handsomely. Those who were originally only promoted by 1 level would usually be promoted by 2 levels. Those who were only given 1,000 silver taels would usually be given 5,000 silver taels. While the army cheered and cheered, the emperor might not be willing to do it. At least, there was the faint discomfort of being forced to do it. Often, the so-called crime of overshadowing the emperor was also the root of the problem. Marquis Yun's way of doing things seemed to be the opposite, but it was not foolish. It would only produce an even more shocking effect. In addition, when the emperor saw this, other than being pleasing to the eye, he would not have the thought of asking for rewards for his contributions. It was killing many birds with 1 stone. Perhaps there was another layer of effect. Marquis Yun and Yun Yang, father and son who were not related by blood but only in name, were both outstanding characters. As long as the conditions allowed for it, they would habitually display their best form. This was also part of the reason that had led to the current consensus between the two of them. It was not only women who loved to be beautiful, men loved to be handsome and beautiful too. Not long after the army had set up camp, Marquis Yun urged Yun Yang impatiently, "There's still a bit of buffer time now. Let's do it one last time. You've said it yourself, the closer the territory to the capital, the richer it is. I believe there must be a lot of loot nearby. They're all fat sheep, isn't it a waste to let them go?" For a moment, Yun Yang was dumbfounded, speechless for a long time. "You actually stopped at this time because you still have such thoughts? Besides, oil and water, fat sheep, how could such a phrase be used here? I really thought that you had some lofty political consciousness." Lu Zhou thought. In the next moment, all four of them frowned at the same time. The four of them simultaneously sensed an enormous aura that had arrived without any warning, as if it had descended from the heavens and appeared out of nowhere. Marquis Yun took a step forward and shielded Yun Yang behind him. The sword at his waist was unsheathed with a clang as he hollered, "Which expert is it that has come to Yutong's military camp?" A chant echoed in the air, "Who can decide the rise and fall of the ages? Who can gather the clouds into a brush? Who can pluck the stars and swallow the mist?" The incomer's voice was indifferent, filled with an otherworldly aura. The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched at once. He did not know why this person who had suddenly arrived had come, but the thick stench of arrogance had already hit him in the face. "Will you die if you don't act pretentious?" Dong Tianlong, who was standing on the side, curled his lips and rolled his eyes, voicing Yun Yang's thoughts. Almost at the same time, a cold gaze seemed to pierce through the boundless snow and land on Dong Tianlong's face from above the clouds. However, it moved away immediately without a pause, ignoring the fact that it was beneath him to tangle with an ant. The next moment, the wind and snow in the sky surged, and a black curtain that looked like a black cloud suddenly fell from the sky. Upon closer inspection, the black curtain was actually a person wearing a black cloak. The black cloak behind him was like an endless black cloud rolling, giving off a subtle feeling as if it was going to cover the entire sky. The person descended slowly from the sky, the air of immortality seemed to be thicker. He was like a snowflake, falling lightly from the sky at an extremely slow speed. His black hair was crowned high, his black clothes, black robe, and black cloak fluttered in the wind. There was a sword at his waist and a hand that was as fair as jade pressed on the sword's hilt. The incomer was lean and tall, with 3 strands of black beard that fluttered lightly under his chin. With just a glance, one would feel that this person did not belong to the mortal world. He was an immortal of the land, untainted by the mundane world. In addition, this person's cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of perfection. This was not sensed from the aura. That person slowly floated down from the clouds, and when he was 30 feet above the ground, he abruptly stopped, and just stood there in the void, relying on the void. Anyone who saw this would be in awe of his mystical skill and profound cultivation base. However, Yun Yang thought to himself, is he addicted to acting pretentious? Does he really think that he's an immortal, untainted by the mortal world? Chapter 530. Marquis Yun took a step forward, neither servile nor overbearing, and said faintly, "I am Yun Xiaoyao. Although I do not bear the royal surname, I am of royal blood. I wonder if you..." The person waved his hand faintly and said, "I have been away from the secular world for too long. I have long forgotten my name. You can call me Immortal Dahuang for now." Dong Tianlong, who was behind Marquis Yun, rolled his eyes and could not help saying, "You don't remember your own name? Do you still remember the person who raised you?" Although this fellow's personality had changed a lot, he would still occasionally lose his mind. Given the current situation, any ordinary person would definitely not be able to utter such words, but this fellow had just blurted them out without any hesitation. Immortal Dahuang turned his head slowly, his gaze trained on Yun Yang's face as he said faintly, "You are so young and yet you are already so unforgiving. You have no upbringing at all. If you were to give it a few more years, you will inevitably become a scourge in this world." The crowd was dumbfounded. What was going on? It was Dong Tianlong who had said this, but why had immortal Da Huang focused his attention on Yun Yang? Yun Yang could not help feeling a little dumbfounded by the newcomer's sudden action. Could this guy be an idiot? Could he not even tell who was speaking? Although Dong Tianlong had voiced out this young master's thoughts time and time again, the words had never come out from this young master's mouth. Could it be that this fellow was so pretentious that he had turned into an idiot? Could it be that he could not even recognize the person? Yun Yang guffawed and said, I will become a scourge in this world after offending you? I say, immortal Da Huang, your ability to convict people is really impressive. I'm in awe of you, and I can't catch up. He pursed his lips and said, since your eyes are looking at me, then consider it as me saying it. I say, immortal Da Huang, why are you staring at me like that? Are you going to kill me to rid the world of a scourge? It was true that the incomer's ability was unfathomable, especially the way he stood in the air. It was a high-end technique that ordinary cultivators could never hope to achieve, but Yun Yang was not fearful at all, especially when the other party's provocative intention was clear. Both parties were likely to be on opposing sides, so Yun Yang would not choose to compromise. The four of them, including himself, were already at the pinnacle of this world. Unless the other party was at Mr. Nian's level, it was not as if they could not fight. Therefore, Yun Yang's words were harsh and full of sarcasm. Unexpectedly, immortal Da Huang's face suddenly flushed red under everyone's gazes. He said, you little brat, you really don't know what's good for you. You want to stick your neck out for something that has nothing to do with you, and now you even dare to spout nonsense. What kind of logic is this? Forget Yun Yang, even Marquis Yun, Dong Tianlong and the others were dumbfounded. What did he mean by that? It was Dong Tianlong's words. It was one thing for him to pick a fight with Yun Yang, but why was there a sudden reversal here? What was this all about? What was this all about? Yun Yang's thoughts raced. Upon closer observation, he realized that this fellow was obviously talking to him, but his gaze was on Xiao Yun-san. A thought floated into Yun Yang's mind and he almost guffawed. Immortal Da Huang. Yun Yang asked uncertainly, could it be that you have squinted eyes? Immortal Da Huang was enraged, glaring at Xiao Yun-san as he hollered, you're the one who has squinted eyes. Your whole family has squinted eyes. Xiao Yun-san was speechless. Yun Yang could not help but break out in laughter. Marquis Yun's face twitched when he saw this, almost bursting into laughter. This person had suddenly appeared, descending from the sky like a divine dragon. Be it his aura or his cultivation base, they were so high that no one could fathom him. His every move was like an immortal. Also, the opening poem that he recited at the beginning could be said to elevate his image to a considerable level. Just as the crowd was guessing who this person was and what he was doing here, who would have thought that this fellow was actually a natural sufferer of squinting? Furthermore, this fellow's squinting had reached a point where it could shock the world and make the gods weep. Yin Yang was relieved and said, Immortal Da Huang, please don't be angry. It's just a chronic illness, there's nothing you can do about it, right? I'm not trying to mock you by testing you, but, if this immortal wants to avoid similar troubles in the future, I have a marvelous solution here that can make up for everything. Hearing this, immortal Da Huang immediately asked anxiously, what is it? It looked like immortal Da Huang had long been anxious about his squint. Yin Yang had only said a few words to divert all of his attention to it. Forget about punishing Dong Tianlong, he might have even forgotten his own business. Perhaps, to immortal Da Huang, nothing was more important than his squinting. Yin Yang chuckled and said, I have my own way to teach you. Now that you've received my method, you should think that you won't find trouble with us anymore, especially with my brother, right? Yin Yang pointed at Dong Tianlong. The other party's ability was unfathomable. If he could avoid a head-on confrontation, it would be best, especially since his manifestation powers had yet to recover. Immortal Da Huang glared at Xia Bingchuan and snorted. You've offended this immortal's dignity just now, you should be punished severely. However, this immortal is magnanimous and will not pursue the matter further. Xia Bingchuan was speechless. Before his words echoed in the air, his gaze was locked onto Chiao Yun-san again, his gaze pleading. Chiao Yun-san was exasperated. Yin-yang was amused inwardly, but he kept a straight face as he said, I wonder why Immortal Dahuang has come to my army so suddenly? Hearing the question, Immortal Dahuang's eyes were still fixed on Chiao Yun-san as he answered, this immortal has penetrated the mysteries of heaven and comprehended the myriad aspects of the secular world. The trend of this world has its own heaven's will. Your previous battle has defied heaven's will and added countless variables to this secular world. This immortal has come under orders to investigate, to set things right and guide them back to their origin. Yin-yang smiled in disdain. Set things right and guide them back to their origin? Could it be that our victory this time is a heaven-defying act? According to what you've said, doesn't this mean that we should have lost this battle? Only then would it be in line with heaven's will? Immortal Dahuang snorted and said, Indeed. Bullsh *t. Yin-yang could not help but holler angrily, what kind of logic is this? We fought a bloody battle to protect our home and country. How can we lose and not win? Immortal Dahuang said faintly, this can't be helped. This is heaven's will. Yin-yang asked, where is heaven's will? What is heaven's will? Immortal Dahuang was taken aback. What I'm here to tell you now is heaven's will. Yin-yang did not know whether to laugh or cry when he heard that. He then said with a chuckle, this immortal, may I ask, if your enemy's ability is weaker than yours and you're not afraid of him, you can even destroy him with a flip of your hand, but someone comes to tell you that you should be killed by this enemy of yours? This is heaven's will, the trend of the world. I wonder if you're willing to abide by it and allow yourself to be killed? Immortal Dahuang was displeased. How can this be? Even if his ability is stronger than mine and he comes to kill me, I won't allow myself to be killed. Besides, his ability is weaker than mine. If he dares to come, he'll only be killed by me. How can I give my life to him? Yin-yang chuckled and said, so even immortals are unwilling to be killed? Dongxuan's ability was weaker than mine when they came to attack previously. Isn't it expected that they would be defeated by me in the end? How can I admit defeat just because of so-called heaven's will and so-called major events? Immortal Dahuang's eyes bulged. This is two different things. Yin-yang had long noticed from the squint incident that this Immortal Dahuang was not very bright despite his ability. Now, he was even more certain and said, how are they two different things? Aren't these two things the same logic? May I ask, Immortal, what's the difference between these two things? Immortal Dahuang pondered for a moment, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. In the end, he said in exasperation, heaven's will is fixed. How can it be changed so easily? Yin-yang chuckled and said, is there no destiny in a human's life? Can it be changed at will? There's a joyous event. Among us siblings, we've actually become a couple. Congratulations to a Rising Wind and National Beauty, Xiangxiang, for becoming partners. Both of them got to know each other because of my book. Today, they've finally walked into marriage hand in hand. Chapter 531. Immortal Dahuang scratched his head for a while, feeling a little speechless. Suddenly, he asked in a low voice, where is your emperor? I won't argue with you. I'll go talk to him. Yin-yang pointed and said, the emperor is in the capital city, over there. Go quickly. All right. Immortal Dahuang flew up and soared into the clouds, vanishing in the blink of an eye. His speed was incomparably fast, his speed unparalleled. He seemed to be flustered from being questioned, so he seized the opportunity to leave. The group looked at each other in bewilderment. This guy was simply an idiot. Where did he come from? What did he want to do by coming all the way here? This person seemed to be out of his mind, but his ability was incredibly strong. Among Yutong's skilled cultivators, no one could compare to him. This person alone was already a huge problem. The group was confused, unable to make heads or tails of what was going on. He had come without a clue and left without a clue. You must be a clown sent by the monkeys. With a whooshing sound, Immortal Dahuang appeared once again and landed right in front of Yun Yang. His eyes were fixed on Dong Tianlong as he asked anxiously, "What was the cure for squint that you mentioned just now? I'm not going to pursue your offense anymore. Why aren't you telling me your cure?" Immortal Dahuang's face was anxious and his eyes were filled with impatience, but his gaze never landed on Yun Yang. The group could not help but feel apprehensive. Yun Yang coughed and said, "My cure is simple and clear. Allow me to ask you something first. Actually, with your current cultivation base, you don't need to use your eyes to recognize objects anymore, do you?" Immortal Dahuang nodded. "That's right. Then it's simple. When you talk to someone in the future, as long as you don't look at the other person's face intentionally, you can just look at the sky when you speak." Yin Yang said, "This way, not only can it accentuate your superiority and arrogance, it can also avoid being seen through by others." Immortal Dahuang clasped his hands behind his back and looked up at the clouds in the sky, saying faintly, "Is that so?" Yin Yang nodded. "Yes, yes, yes. Does it make me look superior?" Immortal Dahuang stared at the skies. "What if it's a battle? Isn't this not good for the war?" It seemed like this guy had also been looked down upon in battle. Yin Yang said, "Maintain it during the battle. Or, when he turns around, he can make a sidelong glance at the enemy, using this to show his contempt. As the saying goes, sidelong glance at the heroes of the world, and no one else is in his eyes." It was absolutely domineering, and with a single look, it would make anyone feel convinced and impressed. "And you're scared?" Immortal Dahuang turned half of his head and glared at Yun Yang from the corner of his eye. His tone was filled with disdain as he said, "Is that so?" Yun Yang was speechless. "You're really applying what you've learned. But why the F***ck are you looking at me? Do you really think you're cool like this?" Who would have thought that Immortal Dahuang would fall in love with this method after just one experiment? He stared at the clouds in the distance for a while, then said in an extremely calm voice, "This method is really not bad. Little friend, I owe you one." Then, he cast a sideways glance at Yun Yang in disdain and rose from the ground with a swoosh, disappearing without a trace. Yun Yang was speechless. Who is this person? What's his background? What's his identity? Does anyone know? Marquis Yun's expression was solemn as he asked a series of questions, leaving everyone perplexed. How would we know who this lunatic who popped out of nowhere was? Jumping down like an idiot and putting on a show for a while, only to leave behind a legend of failing to put on a show and being F***ked, then, he left with his tail between his legs. This was definitely a classic example of putting on a show and turning into an idiot. Or perhaps, this person was an idiot deep down in his bones? Throughout the entire process, he had only spoken a few rambling sentences that no one else could understand. It was just a mystery, not even the most profound of mysteries. Putting aside this person's intelligence, his cultivation base is extremely high. Marquis Yun's expression was grim. So high that I can't even fathom it. Bai, what do you think? Bai Shua thought about it and said, "This person's cultivation base is extremely high indeed. The feeling he gives me might not be as good as the Ling Xiaozue I met a few days ago. Compared to Jun Moyan back then, he's probably still slightly weaker, but compared to the Four Seasons Tower's four venerable lords, he doesn't pale in comparison, perhaps even surpassing them. He should be at the pinnacle of this world." Yin Yang smiled and said, "I think that the person we should be concerned about is definitely not this person." Marquis Yun and Bai Shua turned to ask at the same time, "What?" Yin Yang said faintly, "This person's cultivation base is high, even higher than the Four Seasons Tower's four venerable lords, enough to be ranked among the pinnacle of this world, but this person is obviously ignorant of worldly affairs. Isn't it obvious that his mind isn't clear?" The group nodded, agreeing with this point. A person who does things in such a muddle-headed manner has such a profound cultivation base. Putting aside whether his words are reasonable or not, it's obvious that he's implying something. It's equally obvious. Combining the above analysis, it's not difficult to come up with a conclusion. This person must be a disciple of some great sect, and his position isn't very high either. Yun Yang said softly, what all of you should be thinking about now is, what kind of sect or sect is it? A sect. Just a random disciple who doesn't seem to have a clear mind has a cultivation that can shock the world. Furthermore, this sect seems to be very concerned about the rise and fall of the continent. They're always talking about the heavens and the general trend. Yun Yang spoke clearly. Perhaps it's not just concern, it's very likely that they'll intervene. I can even make a bold guess. This person could very well be sent here to test the waters. Perhaps he's a follower of some sect's leader. Or perhaps, a junior brother? A guardian? Something like that? Yin Yang said, however, no matter which of my guesses this immortal Dahuang's identity is, how terrifying must the sect he's from be? Marquis Yun and the others were taken aback. Yin Yang continued to speak softly, if there's really such a sect in this world, what's the sect's overall capability like? Compared to the Four Seasons Tower that's currently at its peak and known as the world's #1, which is stronger? Marquis Yun, Bai Shue, and Fang Mafei were deep in thought, their expressions unusually grim. They were no longer as cheerful as before. If Yin Yang's guess was right, then the terror of this sect was unprecedented. What's more frightening is that this sect doesn't harbor any goodwill towards us at all. They're even more displeased that we've repelled Dongxuan's army. Perhaps, in their minds, Dongxian is the one who should be fated to win. Now that we've actually won, it's a defiance of nature. Defiance of nature. Speaking of the word defiance, I wonder if it reminds you of something? Yin Yang asked, as if he was talking to himself, could it be that this sect regards its own existence as heaven? That it views its own sect's will as heaven's will? We've gone against their will to pick Dongxian as the winner, and they're saying that we're defiant of nature? Yin Yang mused, then, does this mean that they're trying to control the change of the world's dynasties and even the rise and fall of the world's imperial power? If there's such a superpower, why haven't we known about it? Logically speaking, if such a sect really exists, the whole world should know about it. It's the top sect of Tianxian continent. Chapter 532. The more Yun Yang spoke, the worse Marquis Yun's expression became. His gaze towards Yun Yang was filled with shock. It was only the appearance of this person, the bits and pieces of information, but Yun Yang had actually thought of so much and so far. Following Yun Yang's train of thought, he had almost dug out this person's background completely. This kind of reasoning skill, this kind of brain, it was simply frightening. In spite of this, Marquis Yun was also thinking, yes, such an obvious deduction from the surface to the inside has almost pointed to the source. Why haven't I thought of where this source came from? He was not the only one who had not thought of it. Even Fang Mafei and Bai Shue did not know. Bai Shue was ranked top 10 among the world's swordsmen while Fang Mafei was from the concourse of the underworld. They were both well-informed people. This was rather intriguing. Yin Yang reminded, this person is obviously here to look for trouble. His stance is clear, but he asked who is of royal blood the moment he arrived. This question was even more suspicious. After we gave him a series of answers, he left just like that and almost forgot about this strange question. But now, where did he go? I think, if I'm not wrong, this person should have gone to Tiantang City to look for His Majesty. Yin Yang said, this person's background is most likely related to a massive force, a reclusive sect that we've never come into contact with. Perhaps His Majesty knows and can give us an answer. If old Marshal Chiu isn't unconscious now, he might know. However, the other party's stance is clear. It leaves us with time to figure out his intentions. Similarly, this person's identity and the existence of his sect are no longer a problem to us. Yun Yang smiled and said, because we'll meet again sooner or later. Even if there's really a remarkable existence, if it's only this so-called immortal Dahuang, it's not that difficult to deal with. Yin Yang flashed a relaxed smile. That's right. Let's complete today's mission. This is the last wave, and it's going to be a huge haul this time. Marquis Yun was speechless. Bai Yishue was speechless. On the other side, His Majesty was still waiting with his hands behind his back, waiting for the warriors to return. Suddenly, dark clouds surged in the sky, as if the entire sky was dyed with a layer of ink. Then, a black figure appeared in midair under the clouds. This person was in high spirits, tall and slender, with a sage-like demeanor. At this moment, he stood with his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. He said faintly, "Is that the Emperor of the Empire of Yutong?" His Majesty could not help but frown at the sudden arrival of the newcomer, who also had a condescending manner. "May I ask who you are?" The man smiled faintly and recited in a long voice, "Who can decide the rise and fall of 1,000 years? Who can make the country fall? Who can gather the clouds into a pen? Who can pluck the stars and swallow the haze? Does your Majesty know who I am now?" His Majesty the Emperor was confused and said, "Please speak frankly, Your Excellency." The man snorted as if he was very dissatisfied with Yutong's Emperor's attitude. With his head still held high, he sauntered down from midair with his arms behind his back. There was clearly nothing beneath his feet, but at this moment, it was as if he was walking on a flight of stairs, steadily descending. "Emperor of Yutong, do you know that the Empire of Yutong has now gone against destiny and the will of heaven?" His Majesty the Emperor seemed to have understood something when he heard this, but he still stood calmly and said faintly, "I don't understand what Your Excellency is saying. Since I have ascended the throne, I have strived to rule the country and bring peace to the world. I have treated the billions of people equally and tried my best to keep the country safe among the various countries and powers. I don't know where I have gone against heaven's will. I don't understand." Immortal Dahuang's tone was still light, his voice ethereal as he said, "The will of heaven's will is invisible to the naked eye, but it is everywhere and ever present. What you think is right may not be right, and what you think is wrong may not be wrong as well. Perhaps your unintentional struggle is the manifestation of the will of the heavenly Tao." There was a hint of mockery in the depth of His Majesty's eyes as he said unhurriedly, "Oh? For example?" Immortal Dahuang continued faintly, "For example, a person must die today. If he were to live to tomorrow, he would have gone against heaven's will and obstructed the flow of the world. This is going against the will of heaven. This is going against the will of man. This is not what man should do, and he will definitely be punished." His tone was heavy as he said, "The same logic applies to a country as well." His Majesty said, "I see. I wonder which will of heaven's will the Empire of Yutong has gone against. How have we gone against it, and how should we be punished?" Immortal Dahuang said, "Yutong should have perished in this battle of the century from all four sides. Dongxian, on the other hand, is the destiny of Empire of Yutong. It should have gone with the flow and laid the foundation for the peace of Tianxian in the future. However, the Empire of Yutong has defied nature to emerge victorious. You have defied the will of heaven, and you should pay the corresponding price." His Majesty the Emperor was not angered when he heard this. Instead, he laughed and said, "So this is the so-called will of heaven's will. I wonder how this expert knows about this will of heaven's will?" Immortal Dahuang replied solemnly for the first time, "This reputed one is the executor of heaven's will. Of course, I know the gist of it. Executor of heaven's will. This is the first time I've heard of such a position existing in this world." An amused smile hung on the corners of His Majesty's lips as he said, "Does this mean that this so-called will of heaven's will is decided by you lot?" His Majesty the Emperor of Yutong had always been a shrewd man, a shrewd one. Although he had only met Immortal Dahuang for a short while, he had already vaguely understood a little from what this person had said. This mysterious expert who spoke of heaven's will and went against the will of heaven's will seemed to be a little muddle-headed. He had not even mentioned who he was until now, only emphasizing that he and Yutong had gone against heaven's will and had defeated the four-nation coalition army that they should not have defeated, so they should be punished. This kind of nonsense with a red mouth and white teeth was simply preposterous. Was it a crime to win a war? Perhaps other countries other than Yutong would be happy to hear such arguments, but Yutong would never accept such nonsense. No matter how high the cultivation base of the person who spoke was, no matter how high his theory was, it was still nonsense. At the same time, His Majesty thought of another crucial thing. This person before him had not appeared out of thin air. He must have had a background. If the so-called will of heaven's will he spoke of was real, there must be a terrifying force behind him. However, if there was such a force, why would they send such a person here? What kind of explanation was this? Was he here to offend someone? Was he here to embarrass himself? Even if there really was heaven's will, how could he say it in public to an emperor who was on a completely different standpoint? Did he not see that there were tens of thousands of people around? They were all Yutong's people. Speak for yourself, do you not? Of course, we are the ones who decide the will of heaven's will. Immortal Dahuang blurted out without hesitation. Anyone who heard him would think that he was talking nonsense from a fool. His Majesty's eyes were filled with meaningful mirth. Then, can I understand it this way? Whoever you say is the ruler of the world, that person will be the ruler. Is this what you mean? Immortal Dahuang raised his head and said, of course. His Majesty said, it can be further reflected in, which country you say can rule the world, that country will definitely be able to conquer Tianxian? Even if it can't, it has to be done, right? I'm attending the Writers' Congress of Shandong Province. Sigh, the discipline is so strict. Hand in your phone before the meeting, don't move around, don't leave the hotel. I didn't move around either. I had a meeting in the afternoon and slept the entire afternoon. Chapter 533. Yes, your understanding is absolutely correct. In the face of the emperor's question, Immortal Dahuang acted as if he was the most supreme in the world. His Majesty asked, since my understanding is correct, I also understand that only the country that you are sure belongs to can live with the world, while the other opposing countries should all die, right? Even if this country has no future, no strength, and is defeated on the battlefield, even so, they are still destined to follow the trend of the times and hope. Is that right? Immortal Dahuang said domineeringly, yes, it is. Heaven's will is like a knife, it has long been decided. How can it be disobeyed? His Majesty asked in a low voice, then may I ask who is heaven's will? Why is it so incredible that it cannot be disobeyed? Immortal Dahuang was taken aback when he heard the question. It was not because of the Emperor of Yutong's question, but because he had noticed in shock that many of the people below had suddenly become agitated. Their gazes that were looking at him were as if they wanted to devour him. Have I offended all of you? He did not know that in the short conversation just now, His Majesty the Emperor of Yutong had successfully twisted the so-called heavens will into their own will to impose on others. He had even successfully led them to stand against the entire empire of Yutong's people. He had successfully set a living negative example and made everyone in Yutong share a common enemy. The people of Yutong who were present shared the same thought, they only had one thought in mind. It was not that they had never seen unreasonable people before, but they had never seen one to this extent. Whoever you say can do it? You have to do it even if you can't. Based on what? Because we can't do it even if we win? Based on what? Who do you think you are? If you're so King awesome, why don't you ascend to the heavens? What you said was already so awesome. Similar thoughts were guided by His Majesty with just a few words, deeply rooted in the hearts of everyone present. These people were like kindling. Once they left this place, they would be like a spark that could start a prairie fire in an instant. Immortal Dahuang had now become the public enemy of the entire empire of Yutong. His Majesty, the Emperor of Yutong, had successfully used the fool to incite the people of Yutong to be united against a common enemy. He then looked at Immortal Dahuang again and said softly, I have yet to ask for the name of this expert before me. Immortal Dahuang was taken aback. I didn't tell them my name? After a pause, he raised his head to look into the distance and pretended to say, I am. You can just call me Immortal Dahuang. I have left the mortal world and have gone through countless reincarnations. I have long forgotten my own name. The corners of the emperor's mouth twitched. How many cycles? No matter who ascended to the throne, he or she could at least be the emperor for a few decades. This was an undeniable reality. But what did Father Emperor mean? Did the Crown Prince? Did he? What? Do I still have hope? If he did, how should I work hard? I'm still weak in the military, and so is the government. How should I strengthen them? What should I do to pull the Crown Prince off the throne and replace him with me? The princes were deep in thought. Occasionally, their gazes would meet, but all they could see from each other's eyes was viciousness and wariness. His Majesty was deep in thought as well. His thoughts weighed heavily on his mind. Now that the situation was settled, he hoped that old Xiao would return and recover quickly. He was the only one who knew about that person. That supreme cloud had left a message about his grandson, but he had never returned. He had waited for such a long time, but there was no news at all. Now that the war had ended and the external worries were gone, his grandson could finally come back. What did the little fellow look like now? What was his personality like? Could he shoulder the responsibility? How he wished to see him now. As Yutong's emperor and people waited eagerly, they finally saw dust billowing from afar. Everyone was invigorated to see the returning warriors that they had been anticipating for a long time. A smile appeared on His Majesty's almost frozen face. Just as he was about to step forward, he turned back to look and his expression darkened. Where did the Crown Prince and the princes go? The faces of the ministers and guards at the side were all ashen. For a moment, no one responded. Feeling that the weather was too cold, the princes would probably stand for a while before going back to their carriages to rest with a heater. When they were tired from sitting, they would come out and stand for a while, repeating the process. Who would have thought that His Majesty would ask at this exact moment, when the princes were all running away? Your Majesty, the weather is too cold. The princes cough. The Grand Tutor looked conflicted. Ridiculous. His Majesty immediately flew into a rage. He was so angry that he could barely breathe. He exploded like a thunderbolt. Bitter cold? What bitter cold? The soldiers have braved the bitter cold at the border to fight, to sacrifice, to risk their lives, to die. They have been protected by the soldiers and have enjoyed the honor that has been ensured through countless sacrifices. Now that the soldiers have returned, they are afraid of the cold even if they are asked to wait here. What kind of nonsense is this? Is this the royal demeanor that you've taught? The meeting lasted until 9:30. There was really no time to write today. Anxious. Only one thing was more urgent. Chapter 534. The Grand Tutor was upset. As a teacher, how could he not be angry? Why were his students so useless? They were just standing outside in the cold wind for a while. Would they die from the cold if they stood there for a while? However, they were princes. How could they be compared to normal students? What he could do was only advise them. How could he teach them? The Grand Tutor had even thought that if there was a prince who insisted on standing outside and fell sick, it might make the emperor look at him in a different light. Get these bastards out here right now. His Majesty roared furiously. Even if they all freeze to death here, they are not allowed to move a single inch. If anyone dares to go inside to warm up, I will strip him of his identity and let him rest here forever. His Majesty's words were full of severity. The 7 or 8 princes who left without permission all got out of their carriages. All of them lowered their heads, not daring to look at the king's face. What the hell did I give birth to? Look at you guys. You don't have the manners of a ruler. The king humphed and turned his head. He looked into the distance, but there was only disappointment in his heart. How dare this kind of trash dream of inheriting my throne and ascend to the throne? Ridiculous. If I pass the throne to them, I won't be able to face my ancestors even if I die. Crown Prince. The king said coldly, come to my side. The crown prince walked over, shivering. Half of it was because he was scared, and the other half was because he was freezing. The crown prince was a noble, but his cultivation was shallow. He had just come out of the warm carriage. Even if he wanted to behave better, it was beyond his ability. He was really embarrassed. Forget it. Go back. The king closed his eyes and sighed helplessly. Looking at the crown prince, he was scared and shivering. His eyes were vicious. He was angry, but he didn't dare to say anything. He was full of evil thoughts. The king's face was bleak. The helplessness and disappointment in his heart had reached its peak. He was so depressed that he wanted to die. It was not just disappointment anymore. It was hopelessness and desperation. These princes. Could they really only be like this? At this moment, Upeza could not help but feel boundless regret for his past self. Because of the strange poison in his body, his energy was extremely limited. It was already beyond his ability to worry about the affairs of the country. In addition, there was the first prince, who he had never had to worry about, in front of him. As a result, for a long time, he had never paid attention to his sons. So it turned out that their minds and sentiments had already been corrupted to this extent? None of these princes would be able to inherit the great cause, especially now that they were preparing for the future of Tianxian continent. They were not worthy and did not even have the right to try. A man hates his wife and son the most, the king sighed in his heart. Looking into the distance, the army was getting closer and closer. He could already see the neat formation of the army and the neat and clean flags. His Majesty's eyes couldn't help but warm up. In that instant, his blood boiled. In an instant, he tossed these troublesome matters aside. Nothing was more important than welcoming the return of the army and the heroic souls. He tidied himself up and strode out to welcome them. Almost at the same time, a command rang out. The three armies stopped in their tracks at the same time. Dismount. Salute. A few leading generals stepped out from the crowd and walked forward. His Majesty heaved a long sigh of relief, forcefully suppressing the urge to let his tears flow freely. It was tragic. It was truly tragic. Marshal Fu Baogua is still guarding the old site of the Fortress of Resilience, intending to rebuild the fortress and build an impregnable fortress. He said that we should send our regards to your Majesty. As long as Fu Baogua is still around, the Fortress of Resilience will forever remain in Yutong's hands. Shangguan Lingxiu represented all the generals and reported to His Majesty. At the same time, she also stated the main reason why Fu Baogua did not return to the capital to report on his duties as the Eastern Frontlines Marshal. It was one thing for the emperor and his officials to be in harmony, but they still had to go through the necessary procedures. It was not a pleasant sight to see someone with ulterior motives plotting against their ruler. Welcome. His Majesty's lips quivered. Heroes, return. I am proud of all of you. I am proud of what all of you have done. Warriors, what comes next is what I, the Emperor, have to do. I swear to the heavens, be it the warriors who are still here or the loyal souls who have fallen into eternal slumber. I will never let you down. Behind him, a deafening salute boomed. My warriors. His Majesty bellowed. Home. Tens of thousands of warriors wept at the same time. Touching the bundles on their backs, hot tears streamed down their cheeks. Brothers, it's home. We're home. I'll send you home. There was jubilation both in and out of Tiantang City. Countless people were laughing with tears in their eyes. His Majesty personally accompanied Qiu Jinhan's carriage to the residence of Qiu. According to conventional etiquette, no matter how outstanding the returnee's meritorious service was, there was no reason for an emperor to send his official home. Today, however, His Majesty had broken this rule and sent old Marshal Qiu home personally. The weather was really cold. This time, old Mistress Qiu did not wait 100 miles away, but waited by the city gate. Finally, she saw the carriage carrying her husband arrive. Only when she saw her husband's peaceful face as if he was sleeping soundly did she finally burst into tears. These were tears of heartache, but they were also tears of relief. Since the beginning of the expedition, the ominous signs that had never been there had weighed down on old Mistress Cho like a mountain, suffocating her. A few days ago, she had even felt that her husband was about to leave the netherworld. At that moment, the old mistress had wanted to follow him to the netherworld. Fortunately, her mind was clear and she still hoped that her husband could return. She could not help but feel fortunate. If she had died in vain that day, her husband would have been left to sleep alone. How would the old man live if he woke up? Now, everything had finally passed. Even though her husband was unconscious, he had not died in the battle. He could definitely wake up. This was enough. This was heaven's blessing, giving them the chance to walk on together. Marquis Yun stepped forward to say a few words of comfort and was about to speak to His Majesty when the Emperor unexpectedly said softly, "Wait a moment, I want to speak to you." Marquis Yun rolled his eyes and said, "All right. You want me to wait, I'll wait." And this short wait was not a short wait, but a long wait that lasted all the way until nightfall. By the time everything was done, it was already deep into the night. His Majesty returned to the palace with a heavy heart. The first thing he did was to issue an order. Search through the secret documents of the royal family, especially those that have been sealed for a long time, including the documents of the previous dynasty. Find all of them and place them in the royal study. A single order and 3 consecutive, all of them, almost exhausted the eunuchs. Then, His Majesty sat there with his eyes closed, heaving long and short sighs. More than 1,000,000 soldiers, His Majesty's long sigh was not an act, it was genuine heartache. After a long, long time, he spread out the brush and paper and wrote a few words. "The loyal soul shall not be lost, the noble spirit shall live forever." And that you're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.